Welcome to the Emotional Horsemanship podcast. I am your host, Lockie Phillips, and I help deeply caring equestrians create emotionally balanced horses with science, empathy, and feel. This podcast is a safe place for anyone who desires a better future for horses and for the equestrian lifestyle. I hope that you will enjoy these solo and collaborative episodes where we enjoy a deep insight into our horses' worlds and ways in which we can make that better for them. If you love horses and are willing to do right by them, you're going to love this podcast. And I thank you for being here. My guest on the podcast this week is my friend Gillian Larson. Gillian Larson is best known on Instagram by her handle Through Rider. Gillian is a long-distance trail rider whom, through this conversation, I found out that she fell into long-distance trail riding because she found herself in a relationship with an incredible 1 in a million mare, whom only seemed to thrive when she was in the backcountry, making long miles over difficult conditions every single day. I was captivated by Gillian's story, and we later got talking and have become quite friendly. Meeting with Gillian for this podcast, and you'll see that this episode is 3.5 hours long, and I've in fact gone back on my own promise and decided to deliver this as one episode, not two. It became clear to me that Gillian has a very unique brain, a brain no doubt formed by the long miles and long distances she's formed with her horses out there in the wilderness. She has the ability to think her thoughts from start through to finish and to take her time getting there. And I was so enraptured to hold space for the way she thought, the way she spoke, and the way she answered my questions. In fact, when we met to sit down and record this episode, before we were going to hit the record button, we were just visiting and talking and catching up. And the next thing I knew, a few minutes had rolled by and there was no need to pause it. So I just said, hey, Gillian, keep talking and I'm just going to hit record. So this episode actually begins just like her mare did, at a gallop. And it continues going all the way through. I love Gillian and what she does and what she stands for. And I'm so happy to present her on the podcast today. Keep talking. So you've been following me since before I moved up into the mountains, and you remember that I was moving up there to work for them, and then you went to the next. So that's good memory, Gillian.
Thank you. Yeah, I've also been told I have a bit of an obsessive memory, and I'm very chronologically memory oriented. I can remember things very well chronologically. So I think that also helps. I've always been that person that remembers birthdays, and when I'm thinking the past, everything always happens on a timeline in my brain. So it's made at least it easier to keep kind of my past rides somewhat in my brain. It gets a little messy when I've done one trail 3 times. And so that starts to get a little bit messier in terms of trying to remember where I was on different dates, in the same place, but just different years. That gets a little trickier. But for the most part, I can hold it together.
I get it. Now I'm starting to understand because I've got a lot of questions for you. And one of the questions is, how do you do what you do? That you just described it to me. You've already answered the question. You're a homing pigeon. You have this, you have a memory for space and time and things and happenings and all that. That answers the question for me. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
If you put me in an urban environment, then I'm the worst homing pigeon
ever. I see.
I cannot orient. Anytime I've traveled abroad, which hasn't been for a while, but I remember I was trying to make it on the tube to Heathrow Airport, and I could not figure out the subway system. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. And I basically just went to my default state of just looking really lost and really sad and help me. And thankfully then some nice person was basically escorted me through 30 minutes of tube riding, out of his way to then make sure I made it to the airport. I was that's the level of that's the level of hand holding I need in like an urban setting. But yes, you can plop me in the mountains and I feel like I can do pretty darn well in the mountains in terms of orienting.
Sick.
So up there I feel good, but urban environments I'm a mess.
Oh my God. I totally agree with you. I run, not walk away from urban environments. Over it.
Yeah.
So over
I find it stressful and overstimulating.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of all that, I, for some reason, could not handle the navigation when it comes to like bus schedules. And maybe that was part of too, growing up in LA, public transportation's horrific. And so I was used to either being driven by my parents or as soon as I was 16, driving myself everywhere. But you try to give me public transportation and it is not going to be pretty. It's not pretty at all. And if I do public transportation, I have to like plan it from start to finish way in advance. So that way I don't have to think on my feet in the moment and I can just like go through my steps. Yeah, it's not pretty.
Yeah. We live close to this one road of town/village. It's really great. It's got everything you need, but it's right down the road and it's tiny in the middle of nowhere. If I go to the village to like just go to the supermarket and I come home, I have to have a lie down and like low sensory input for like half an hour just to recover from going out into public. I don't know exactly what's wrong with me, but I don't know. The more time you spend out in nature, the more you become like it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. That definitely just urban environments start to feel too much. Even when I lived in LA, like going anywhere downtown was like, no, I never had an urge to go down to like Hollywood or downtown LA or out to the clubs. Definitely not. I've always been like, I can't handle that level of just too much. You know, it's.
But LA is too much.
I got to move.
I think that's the brand of downtown LA is just too much with a capital TM. I think that's what it's supposed to do, right?
Yeah. And definitely even just driving. Like I've always had a truck since I've had horses. And trying to like find parking for a truck in downtown LA is like, it gives me heart palpitations just thinking about it. It's like, anything to avoid that.
I'd give up. I would just give up. I would just never go there, right?
Yeah, it's brutal. It's definitely, even now I have to go to LA once in a while for like a doctor's appointment or for a work thing. And I now have like a bigger truck than I even did when I lived there for all those years. And just parking it, like I'm literally, again, with like the crazy planning before I even get to the city, I'm like looking at the parking lot and figuring out like how strategically I would park in the parking lot if I can fit. And if I can't fit, you know, because it's just too narrow, like it's really hard to, in a narrow space, to make a full right-hand turn into a parking spot. Like if they're angled with my really big truck, I can make it easier. So then it's like, okay, am I going to look for street parking? Like I don't know. That's definitely where my brain goes. I think I'm very logistically oriented. So that probably did serve me very well on my trips.
I think you would have to be. You would have to be. Yeah. So I have this one sort of question I like to ask my guests off the bat. It's a big question, but the idea of the question is just to hear who you are. So I like to ask folks who they are, what they do, and how they do it. In that order. If you can. Only that. But like, Gillian, tell us who you are, what you do, and how you do it, if you can.
Okay, I'll do it. I definitely heard you asking that question on your other podcast episodes, and I was like, oh man,
dang it!
I should practice my elevator speech more because I'm sure he'll ask me that too, and it's intimidating to try.
It is an intimidating question, I guess, but like, I've been on podcasts where, not even just podcasts. I've had conversations with people where they start telling me who I am, and I'm like, whoa. That's my job. You know, I want to give you some space to just like introduce yourself to folks.
No, and that is very nice because I definitely feel like sometimes that happens where people have a perception of what it is I do or, you know, like what it must be like out there. And then they just kind of like put that perception onto me. And quite often what my actual experiences are, it doesn't fit, you know, their perception. So
interesting.
I totally see that. And I'm sure we'll dive into that more.
Well, feel free to blow all of my perceptions out of the water if I've got any. I love that.
Okay, well, we'll see. I feel like you're a pretty like intuitive, empathetic person that tries already to not put too many perceptions on people. So you probably don't have.
But I also have a penchant for subversive thinking, in the sense that I love it when anyone is able to dig underneath my thinking and uproot it and say, actually, it's different, Lockie. And I go, wow, thank you. And if they can do that in like an intelligent way, like major brownie points in my opinion. So yeah. Who are you, Gillian?
Oh, okay. Well, gosh, why is that so hard?
You're through rider. You're the through rider.
In a sense, like my like nickname is Through Rider, and that's what I go by on Instagram as my handle, and that's kind of what I'm known by in a lot of like the trail community, because my name Gillian is a little bit trickier for people to remember.
Gillian, not Gillian.
Yeah, it's like Irish descent that has like the harder G.
Thank you.
No worries. Gillian. I'm used to responding to both. Okay. I don't take any offense to anything like that. And then
can I call you Gil?
Right. Yes, I do go by Gil.
I can call you Gil? Yes. I love that. Yes. Okay, Gil. All right.
Yeah, my friends and family, like that's kind of their shortened nickname for me.
Gil. Love it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess Through Rider became a little bit of an identity because I started at 22 with wanting to ride a Mexico to Canada trail. And it's very popular among like the hiking community, and they call themselves through hikers if you do like the entire trail in one season. And there's lots of different trails you can through hike. They aren't all Mexico to Canada. It's kind of like any, long route that's like an established route. And if you get it done in the set summer season when like the trails are usually open, because they're all kind of high elevation backcountry trails. So you can only access a lot of them during like a short window of the year. So that's kind of like the challenge of it, is to get it all done in the window of opportunity you have. And so obviously a shorter through hike, like some trails are only a couple 100 miles. That's a lot more achievable than like a thousands of mile through hike. So that's kind of the community of people. They're mainly hikers. But if you ride the trail instead, because some of the trails are open to horses, then you're like a through rider. They kind of just like co-opted the term from the hikers. And there's very few through riders. Like there's usually only on like the big, there's like 2 of the 3 Mexico to Canada trails in the US are open to, and one of them doesn't even go all the way from Mexico to Canada, but it's close enough. But the 2 that truly go border to border and finish at like, either the Mexican United States border or the Canada United States border, those 2 are open to horses.
What are those names? What are the names of those 2 trails?
The Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide Trail.
So you're the equestrian version of Cheryl Strayed.
Sort of, yes. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, in a sense. Yeah, Cheryl Strayed did like 1,100 miles of the PCT. She did it in a super high snow year, so she had definitely like the odds piled against her. And like for big snow years, like the year that Cheryl Strayed was attempting her, large section hike, that wouldn't have even been a year that horses could have like done. Definitely not a through ride, just from like the amount of snow. So you have a shorter window of opportunity when you travel on horseback, and there's also just years in general where doing a through ride is not possible, or at least not without like hundreds and hundreds of miles riding along roads instead of the trail while you're waiting for the trail to kind of like melt out. Mm-hmm. So you have to be really choosy about when you go. But so I got the term like through rider as a bit of my nickname because I was usually like the token horseback rider on my trips. There was usually just me. One year there was one other rider out there, but for most of the hikers, they wouldn't know your name. They would just like run into other hikers that are like, yeah, I ran into like the horseback rider that's on trail this year, the through rider. So then when you run into those hikers, weeks or months later, they're like, you're the through rider. So it kind of just like stuck a bit as the nickname, because that's what everyone seemed to already know me as. And it made it easier too when I decided to get an online presence through Instagram after the first like 2 of my Mexico to Canada rides. I kind of wanted to make it easier for the hikers I had met to find me who didn't know my name. So I chose the name Through Rider because I was like, oh, well, that way people like that have met me on trail can like find me. I never expected to like have an actual presence online. I just needed to have an online account in order to partner with a saddle company that would, allow me to like try
Okay.
out different saddles because I was having some saddle fit issues and I was very poor and I needed, a little bit of support in that department. So that's like even why I finally caved and got on social media because kind of like what we were saying earlier, I feel like I get a little overstimulated by some things and like the whole social media thing was very intimidating. So I didn't dive
Listen,
into that until I felt like I had like a push. Like you have to have
you
some sort
have
of
to
social
have it.
media
You have to have
platform.
it.
Yeah.
If I could,
So
if it was
yes.
possible for me to do this work and tomorrow close down all my social media accounts, I would. Where do I sign? Like if I could still work and close down social media, I would, but we can't. It's the ball game we have to play, unfortunately. It's a little bit like signing your soul away to the devil.
And again, I love and hate it. Like it's allowed me to meet so many wonderful people, and some of the people that
Definitely.
I've most connected with is through Instagram. And
Right.
even when I moved to this new community, basically every single one of now my close girlfriends I met because they were locals in the area and they came to one of my workshops. And so if I didn't have like the workshops, I wouldn't have even met like my friend community here. So it's really been even in a local sense, like kind of like my foot in the door to like making a really nice community of people. So I'm very appreciative. I think the part that like intimidates me about Instagram is when you're trying to like when you have a business tied to it. And so you need to like advertise and you need to push, for your business and advocate for yourself. That's when it gets
Tough.
tricky. Like if it's only posting for fun and you have like the pressure off, but I'm really bad at posting about like workshops. Like I'm lucky if I can like make myself do like one singular post that's like, I have a workshop in the springtime, come if you want. Like that's about as good as I am at pushing my stuff because there's something about it that it just gives me anxiety. It's not even that I think it's like icky. Like I have no issues when other people post about it. It's not like it bothers me. There's just something in me that I think doesn't like
I
to
get it.
like, sit there with like a flag and be like, hello,
Yeah.
yes, draw your attention here.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
quite how I don't feel comfortable. Like I don't like having birthday parties. I've never wanted a birthday party where I'm the center of
Really?
attention. It makes me feel uncomfortable. So I'd rather like be the wallflower than be like center
Well,
stage. So having
you're
to like
pretty
promote something is like
the Gillian Gil. Do they call you Lily? Like
No, I've never gotten that
Gilly?
one. I've
Ah,
gotten Gilly. Like that's what my
Gilly.
college roommates kind of called me.
Well, the irony here is, Gil, that you want to be a wallflower, but then you just casually will ride Mexico to Canada by yourself with your horses, despite the logistical mountain involved, intended, which kind of makes you the center of attention. That's the irony here. Like the fact that you've done that more than once, plus all the other rides that you do, makes you the center of attention because people will do a double take and go, sorry, what? Excuse me? Like one of the hallmarks of humility is a dramatic understatement. And a statement like, oh, well, when I did Mexico to Canada twice with my horses, that's a dramatic understatement. It's like my guest Bex Nan when she said, oh, well, I started dissecting horses because I started bringing horse skeletons home. I was like, sorry, how do you just bring a horse skeleton home? Can we backtrack and can you explain that to me? So, like, you started getting into long distance backcountry riding at 22, you said.
Yeah, and it was just I feel like I had just wanted a little bit more. I'd studied abroad the year before
Where did you
and
study?
Australia,
Ah,
in Co- uh, wow, why is this like escaping me? I went to James Cook University, which is in Townsville. There we go. I was trying to like
nice.
merge words together, and I was like, that's not right. It's been a while since I was up there. I guess like 15 years almost. So it's been a
Yeah.
while since I went there. But when I had studied abroad, I guess it's less than 15, but it's close enough. Feels like 15 years. So I studied abroad there, and I had always wanted to go to Australia. It had kind of been like my childhood like dream. I'd even as a childhood like wanted to like live in Australia. And then when I went there and I didn't have my horses, obviously, while I was studying abroad, I realized that it just didn't feel like home. And especially I didn't feel like home not having my horses with me. So I'd already known financially by the time I was in my 20s that like moving to Australia with like multiple horses was like financially
I was about to
not going to
say,
happen anytime soon.
have you got a spare 6 million lying around if you want to be a horse person in Australia?
I'd already like moved on from that thought, but I think there was a part of me that then thought still traveling abroad and that kind of thing would be something I wanted to do because I thought I've always had a bit of an adventurous spirit, and so I thought like, okay, like I could see myself wanting to do that. And then when I studied abroad, just not having my horses around, I felt very like unmoored. Like I just felt like, you know, like a big chunk of like who I was and what made me happy was not there. And it was I felt like unfulfilling. Like I was doing a lot of things that I wanted to do, or at least I thought I wanted to do when I was traveling, and just realized it like wasn't fulfilling.
Okay.
And so when
Did you
I
grow
was
up with
then
horses?
Yes. Yeah. So I'd had horses my whole life.
Ah, love it.
And it was definitely always like a very dedicated like horse mom, like even from a young age. When I was a little kid, you know, we would go ride the horses 2 times a week. I shared my horse with another girl because kind of our mom's perception was we'll split the costs of like, you know, buying and boarding this horse. And my horse was like $300. Like he was a garage sale horse basically. But boarding was still not the world's cheapest in LA, even back then. So they split the costs of having the horse between two little girls because as little kids, you know, you don't usually have like the kind of time dedication to go out and ride like 5 days a week. So the idea was split it between two girls and then we'll see like if any of them end up getting the horse bug. I definitely did get the horse bug, and the other girl did not get the horse bug. And so I then, when he got to be older, I took like full ownership of him, and we moved him to my mom's like backyard when I was 12. Like she and my dad split, and then the property me and my mom moved to, it was only on a half acre, but there was enough space for like one or two horses in the backyard. And so we moved my old guy home, and you know because he was alone, he was very like it was not the right choice. Like he definitely needed to have a companion, but at 12 I didn't feel like there was a whole lot I had a say in that moment. And by the time I was 13, I think he was only home for about a year, maybe a teeny bit more, before we brought home more horses. So it was a short period, but I could tell when he didn't have any other horse companions, like I became like the center of his world. Like he would know that I should be home from school by like 3:30. And if I wasn't outside with him by 4, he would like walk underneath like the window of my bedroom and start like whinnying. Like,
are you coming?
Name? Like,
what was his
Sparky.
name? Sparky. Oh,
yeah.
Bless you, Sparky.
And it just made me, you know, obviously tugged at my heartstrings. And so I went from only taking care of him like 2 days a week, and I wasn't responsible for his feeding or his cleaning or anything. I was just there to ride, to now he lives in my backyard and I have become like the center of his universe. And my mom would teach late a couple nights, so I would get home from school from carpool and I'd be home alone. And, you know, I'm the only one to do all the horse chores. I'm the only one to clean his pen. I'm the only one to feed him. The only one to get him out for exercise. So, you know, around 11, 12, I started riding exclusively alone, basically, because every day I got that horse out, like rain or shine. I got him out. Like I was obsessed. Like he definitely didn't need physically to get out that much, but I felt like he wanted to. And we would make the rounds and all the horses in the neighborhood. We would stop at every single horse so he could like have his little like social interaction. And I just felt
beautiful.
I felt so guilty because I could tell that he was lonely. And I was like, oh my God, like I feel terrible. And like, how can I make this up to him? And so the only way I felt like I could at that age do anything was basically to like every single day take care of him. Like even when I would have weekends at my dad's, he would have to drive me to my mom's so I could just be at my mom's place for a couple hours so I could get out Sparky and take care of Sparky. Like I was incredibly dedicated. Like I slightly missed that level of dedication, but I know it came from a place of like guilt. And I know now like my horses don't really miss me as long as they're getting fed by someone. They're like, it's okay. So it's kind of nice to not have that level of like guilt and dependency on me, trying to enrich an animal's life. But yes, we got more horses after a year. But at that point too, the like seed had been planted in my brain of like, I must be here every single day to basically get my horses out. And I went from having Sparky, who was like a lower energy, like at this point, he must have been like in his mid to late 20s. Like he was an old man. And I went from that to then getting a really young, really hot mare. And so now I was having to get her out every day because she only lived on a half acre. And she needed like,
she would explode. She'd explode if you didn't.
She just needed to go. Like her level, like I could never tire her out. It didn't matter like how long of a ride we did or what we did. Like she was so energetic and she just needed to move her body like all the time. So I went from doing it out of guilt to now doing it also out of guilt for living on a small property and having a hot horse and being like, and now we're still like going out there. So I had a lot of guilt driving all of my like dedication for probably the first like almost decade of like having horses.
See, I would
from,
never
12 to 22. I
would never have picked you that way. I would have never picked you someone who had that background. That's so interesting, Gil.
Yeah, I was definitely, because even when I boarded at college, they were still in like, 12 by 24 pipe runs.
Right.
And so even throughout college, having my high energy mare boarded at college, I still felt like I had to get her out like at minimum 5 days a week,
right?
To just like get her out of her pen and like get her moving. So yeah,
well, at least you did, because there are a lot of people who have horses in those environments who don't do that, and the horses really suffer. I mean, there's a welfare question over the horses not getting the exercise on their own, which you know that, and we don't have. And I'm singing to the choir here on that one. We already know that, but like. It's normal, I've learned, in California. With my little experience in California, it's normal that it's more confined and that there's just not the culture of turnout that you get in other parts of the States, right?
Yeah, land is just so hard to come by, especially in like urban environments. So yeah, any kind of urban horse keeping, it's really hard to give them the physical like desire. And my horse wanted to go. Like she was so impatient. She was very, very hot. And again, I was like 13 when I got her. So my level of horse training skills wasn't the best. So lots of bad habits were developed that we then had to like sort of undo because I was not, focused enough necessarily on like keeping her mindset calm or teaching relaxation. Like that wasn't part of my understanding at that age.
What was her name?
Shila.
This was Shila.
This is Shila, yeah. So I got her when I was 13.
You're speaking about Shila.
Yes, yeah. And she was a hot young, like I was way overhorsed with her, like so overhorsed. Like she jigged everywhere. We did not walk. She was very like hard mouthed because she just wanted to like run everywhere. When I first got her, she had a pretty good head tossing problem where, like having to like sit back because there's just like this head flying around in front of you. So she was like a super hot horse and I didn't like riding in saddles. And so I rode her everywhere in a bareback pad. So to get on her, I would have to like climb on something and jump on.
And then off you were.
Yeah. And she was so eager to go places that I could barely be climbing partway up something. And she's already like swinging over. And I never taught her to pick me up. I didn't have those skills. She taught herself. She learned that we could get going faster the sooner that she hopped over to me and I would jump on. She was just like, let's get going. Like she was just like, we need to move.
Okay. You are bringing back memories for me from my 20s. At one of the trekking yards I used to work at, they had mostly exclusively rescue mares in Spain. It was in the mountains. It was a very rough and ready environment. So many of those mares were like this. There was one mare I remember in particular. She was so much horse that she had to be sold. but I think she was probably missing quite a bit of training, and the turnout was a problem. But for the guides to get on her, she needed two people to hold her, and the guide just basically had to take a running leap at the saddle and then hit the saddle and off you went. I mean, she was just, I mean, some of these mares, they're just completely fearless. And like they say that, you know, a stallion will go to battle for you, but a mare will lay her life down in battle for you. There's something to that. When you find these hot mares that just want to go, like there's nothing you can say. You just have to go with the storm. That's it.
Yeah. Yep. You do have to go with the storm. And I'm sure, you know, with a different approach, like she could have been taught to stand and those things. But again, 13, right, like completely unsupervised, right, like been given this horse that's like a literal fire breathing dragon. Like right. I'm just doing basically, I'm flying by the seat of my pants and I don't even have a saddle. Like I'm just doing the best I can. And kind of learning a lot as I'm going. And it took probably 3 years, I would say, until I started to feel like she and I were starting to click. Like she was so work minded. She was not like a relationship oriented horse. Again, if I had fostered it, you know, to where it was more than just like riding, I think that would have come out of her more. Right. But she was a pretty introverted horse, like very high energy, but very introverted.
Interesting.
Which I know a lot of people are like, an introverted horse is energy conserving. And I'm just like, there's got to be some way though to describe horses that are high energy, but like don't show what they're thinking or feeling easily. And they like process internally. Cause that was definitely Shila. And I was like, there's got to be a word for those horses.
Well, you just described
like, two columns of like, you know, low energy, introverted, high energy, extroverted. Cause I have like high energy, extroverted horses too. And they are very different than like Shila, who is high energy, introverted.
Well, that's the ghost of the Pirelli system, left brain, right brain, etc. But you've described her perfectly. I mean, a lot of horses find it easier just to do it. Just mechanize. Just mechanize. Yeah. Don't ask me how I feel. Don't ask me what I think. Don't ask me my opinion. It's easier for me to just do it. It's almost like a form of disassociation for these horses.
For sure.
Just like with us, if I just go, I don't have to stop and think, you know? And 13 years old, literally flying by the seat of your pants. I mean, what a way to get a good seat, by the way. Like, I hope she was
and I feel like I've lost it now because I don't ride bareback like I used to. Because now I've had so many green horses and they're just a lot more wiggly and don't really
you need a saddle.
Like, just for stability's sake.
And so you're not suicidal, so.
Yeah, and like I'll ride my geldings bareback or at least in pads, because they're, you know, not the type to just like dip out from under me. And I'm hoping to start riding some of my youngsters more bareback, but a couple of times I've hopped on them, so I'm like, they feel like they're pretty solid, and then I hop on them bareback, and I'm like, well, either they aren't, or I'm way out of practice. Like, we are going right back to the saddle.
Wow.
So I feel like I used to have a good seat, but I definitely have a lot of work to do to get back to quite the level I was. But it makes a big difference when you have a horse that really wants to like stay under you. Like there's just those horses that you feel like sometimes stay under you more.
Yes.
And Shila used to sometimes, like she would pretty much stay under you, except for she had this habit around dusk. And I was usually riding at dusk because, you know, I was like in this like high school age. Like I'm in high school. I don't get out of school until 3. And during the winter times, like I pretty much am always riding in the dark, especially if I had after school tutoring or something. I'd get home at like 5 and then it's already dark and we're doing the entire ride in the dark at that point. And there's only trails. Like there's no arena that I own. So it's just trails. And she had this like habit for like the first 3 years that I had her, of when it would be getting dusk, she would she'd get way more spooky and just kind of like, you know, she would see like a dark shadowy bush and that would just really bother her. And when she would spook, if she was a quick horse, she would definitely drop down and like out from under me. And that would be the only real kind of time where I would feel like unseated by her. She definitely wasn't a bucker or anything. Like she was jiggy. But she wasn't bothered by like my legs. Like if I needed to kind of like brace to hold on to her, that didn't bother her.
Interesting. A hot horse, but you could ride with your leg on.
You could ride with your leg. I mean, you didn't ride with your lower leg on because she definitely was all gas, no brakes.
Got it.
But it didn't bother her if you needed to like stabilize yourself. Like I was riding one of my fillies the other day bareback just in the arena. And she was like not having it if I was using my leg at all to grab her to like hold on, because she was being a little wiggly. And I was like, okay, clearly, we have a little bit more work to do. So she knows that, and she's been one of those ones that's been really like laterally oriented. And so like teaching her laterals has been like a natural thing for her. And so she now, when I was trying to ride her bareback, is like, you're asking me so many things. I don't like it. And I was like, I totally understand. Like you're, a little too sensitive to like cues. Whereas this Shila was at least, she wasn't overly sensitive in terms of like that type of cue. So it wasn't very
cue.
laterally oriented. Yeah.
She had the forward
cue.
She had the forward
cue. Bothered by it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I'm sure my filly will get there, but at her stage and what I've been focusing on with her under saddle and like my legs always meaning something, she's just like, what's this bareback nonsense? Like, why are you telling me so much? So I didn't at least have that problem with Shila, which was good. So I could hold on, and I was really good at a young age of like holding on like with just my upper thighs for the most part. Like I never used my lower legs, and I didn't need to use any kind of gas for her. She was all gas, no brakes. But there were times where she would dump me because I'm riding bareback and she spooks at like a shadowy bush. And then when I started to notice that something changed was when I was, I guess, like 16. It was like the summer I was 16, and I was doing summer school at a local community college, and I wasn't getting done with classes until like sometimes like 8 o'clock at night. And so I was again riding in the dark, and there was just something about, I finally just like let go in a certain way. Like I had always been trying different ways to deal with it. Like I remember when she had this like spooking problem, I was like, okay, like, I feel like I have 3 responses I can make. I can get mad at her, I can ignore it, or I can like try to like affectionately like calm her down, or like, praise her in a way, like basically tell her, you're a good girl, it's fine. And I think I went first with ignoring it. Like that was my first strategy, was I'm just going to ignore it because it's nothing of, and hopefully that'll work. And like that made no difference. And then, with at least again, my upbringing, like my next strategy was like, I'm going to like reprimand her, like not smack her, but at least like, she was very, very sensitive horse to like being like reprimanded. Like you could just use your voice. Yeah. You could just use your voice, but no. And like, that meant something to her. So even just me being like, as she's like eyeballing something, and I noticed that she got worse, like more spooky. I had a negative reaction, and this is all happening over just a couple weeks. And then I immediately went to like praising her and telling her she's a good girl and petting her. And like, it made a difference. I was so impressed, like how she really internalized like what I was telling her. I'd never really felt like she cared much what I was thinking or saying. Okay. And it was like this one instance of like, oh, like you actually do listen to me in a sense if I'm communicating with you in a way that you find, appropriate or acknowledging of what you're thinking and feeling.
Okay. I need to just pause right there, because now I understand why you've followed me for the time you followed me, because that's my whole POV, right? It's that we're not to ignore horses, we're not to reprimand them when they give unwanted behavior, but affection, kindness, and communication with the relationship, because you were 3 years into a relationship with this lovely mare, that actually works better than those other options, in my opinion, with most horses. Not all, most horses. And she sounds like not an easy horse. The lifestyle was a problem, you admit, because of the plot she was living on, and riding was kind of her outlet as much as it was yours. And you were young and unsupervised and maybe needed some tools but didn't have them. But like, way to build in horse sense and way to listen to the horse and realize and figure out for yourself, holy shit, this horse does care about me as much as she cares about herself. That is such a badass realization. It almost impresses me more than.
It took 3 years.
Yeah, well, some people go 30 years, 60 years and never get there.
Yeah. And again, like you were saying, it works for a lot of horses, and especially I feel like it works for horses that are kind of that introverted type. And like Shila was never the type that was going to like test boundaries. Like you never needed to kind of like set up a bubble to protect yourself from her because she was always, you know,
off,
like hesitant to approach. And I feel like her son was a bit the opposite. Like he was a bit of like a bull in a china shop. And I had to learn with him how to have boundaries. And I couldn't just, I remember having a hard time with it because then after having his mom for so many years and learning to be super gentle and super quiet and to like facilitate a lot of calmness. Then with him, I was such a pushover that then I had to like, you know, I felt like I had such a hard time establishing boundaries with him because I didn't like being like the bad cop. I wanted to just like be the nice person that was, you know, could just facilitate a relationship through, you know, empathy and love like I did with his mom. And it didn't quite work with him. He was like completely, you know, not listening, not focused on me. And it did take boundaries with him for us to like figure out each other better and not even like firm boundaries. Like I remember trying to do, you know, lunging with him because I didn't know about groundwork. And I was like just lunging him before every ride, hoping I wasn't going to get like bucked off into the stratosphere. And, you know, it only would do so much. And it wasn't really until, and again, I never even learned groundwork while I had him. That still didn't happen. But it was just a kind of developing of learning how to like say no and not even get mad. Yeah. But it was, he had a rearing spinning thing that he would do when he would like refuse to go somewhere or do something. And if I tried to like go toe to toe with him, I would lose because he would just rear. And there's really not anything you can do when a horse rears. Right. Especially again, I was still young. I was still like 19, 20. And it still had no formal training, like still, because he's my first young horse. And I remember, you know, you're constantly told, never get off the horse, never dismount. Then they're teaching the horse that they've won. And it took me a while, you know, of like trying to figure out ways for me to like basically have my way with him while not getting off and like losing every time. To then realize like, okay, I'm just going to get off. And like, as soon as I got off and then walked, I only had to walk like maybe 200 feet past like the sticky point, and then I could get back on and he would just continue. And it was just like, oh, that is so easy. Like I didn't even have to, I didn't have to do anything fancy. All I had to do was just get off and walk 200 feet. And I think within like weeks, definitely within a couple months, that habit completely stopped of him rearing and spinning. Like it was like a non-issue. As soon as he would like plant his feet and start thinking up, I would just like slide off, walk 200 feet and then hop back on and we continue on our way.
This is beyond validating for me to hear, because this is something else that I'm trying to teach that I come up against a lot of pushback for. A lot of people are still out there little ladying and wagging their finger at people and saying, don't you get off that horse. Don't you let them get away with it. I'm like, get away with what? I mean, those people who say that, I believe that that is their experience with their horses, that they are probably constantly trying to win at any cost, that their horses are waiting for an opportunity to get any kind of relief, reprieve, and advantage in that scenario. I believe that that is their experience, but I also am aware that it's possible that they've created that experience that they are then projecting onto others. And to hear you, a horsewoman I respect, someone who has done the miles and someone who has put these relationships with these horses that you're speaking about to the ultimate test, Mexico to Canada, ultimate test, you're saying that you discovered that the horses taught you that, hey, just get off me, walk me and get back on again, and it's all over and the problem will be fixed. That's actually what I teach. And I have a lot of people saying, yeah, but your horses are low mileage. Yeah, but you're a recreational rider. Yeah, but. And then to hear you say that this is your solution and that you found it almost in spite of yourself through listening to the horses and because you had nothing else to try is hugely validating for me. And I know that there'll be a lot of people out there nodding their heads saying, right on, Gil, because you are speaking about this tide of change that I'm trying to usher through in horsemanship, that these solutions don't ask people to give up everything. It's literally right under our noses, and all we have to do is just let go of a couple of like our human bullshit stuff. We just have to let go of like two things, and then just try the other thing, and it will work. And you can still have a working partnership with horses. You can still do stuff with them. The horses will still be generous with you, probably more generous with you, and safer, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that was, in a sense, him boundary pushing was, kind of knowing that like I couldn't do much in response to the rearing. And that was him boundary pushing.
Yeah.
And me getting off and saying, you want to turn around right here because it would always be at a junction, because you know that if we go down this path, it means it's not the quickest way to home. That for him was what he wanted. It wasn't that he wanted me off. What he wanted was to not go down that path. And so me dismounting and saying like, well, we're still going down this path, like be on you or not, was then him being like, okay, like she's, like that was like the boundary. And that, so people think sometimes that you can't enforce a boundary if you like concede anything, like getting off or whatever. But sometimes you have to think like, what is actually happening here? Like, is the horse rearing because he wants me off? And if me getting off is somehow going to reinforce the wrong thing, then like maybe I'll second think it. Very often though, horses, if they want you off,
you should
for a legitimate reason.
Yeah.
It's not usually out of spite. And if it is out of spite, you have a whole other kettle of fish that's a problem. So that's different. But like, if they're rearing and they're acting like they want you off, is that really what they want? Or is it something else? And is it something maybe that like early on, like boundaries, weren't quite going the right way? And again, I think it all came down to, at least with him, like a lack of proper groundwork and a lack of kind of like understanding each other and communicating. And so his way of communicating when he didn't want to do something was
through force
about it.
Just like people, Gil. Like a lot of people, when they don't understand something, they'll just say it harder, faster, louder. And horses will do the same thing when they don't understand. You're talking about boundaries that can still be taught with love and compassion, and boundaries that can be taught without arguing, without violence. And also there's a catch-22 here that I just want to put my finger on, because horses, none of us, horses or even human beings, a monkey, a cicada, my dog, they can't develop a preference for something before they've experienced that thing and discovered that it was no big deal, and maybe it was also pleasant. And a lot of people would see Dakota rearing at that juncture, wanting to go home, and a lot of people would concede to that and say, oh, okay, well, we'll go home now if that upsets you. And then they form an opinion. They say, my horse does not like to go down that path, or my horse does not like trail riding, or my horse doesn't like going for very long. And I think that that's a mistake, because you can't develop a preference in a horse. A horse can't enjoy something, like something, prefer something before they've got experience at the thing. And sometimes to get experience at the thing, you come up against a horse that pushes back. So what do? Do you concede, or do you find a non-violent way to introduce this activity to the horse, an easy way, non-combative way to introduce the activity to the horse and say, hey, we can go down this road, and I'm not asking you to backflip backwards over hot coals. It's actually a nice time when we go out there. You actually can enjoy it if you try.
And minimizing the amount of fights you have is what makes it enjoyable. Like I feel like if I had done things with more knowledge and experience in the very beginning, to where we had a more harmonious working relationship, where he understood that if we move our bodies together, or if I ask nicely and I'm rewarding his try, and just a whole level of like, if we had a different just kind of foundation
horsemanship
he didn't have because I didn't have those skills, that rearing at that junction probably wouldn't have even happened. But sometimes these fights that kind of like pop up in different places are really just a result of the reading holes earlier on in the relationship that you didn't really see, and that you just kind of blow past. And then suddenly you're having a fight or a confrontation in this other category, and it's just like a build up to it. And so
whack-a-mole.
Yeah. And it's like, I try now with my younger horses, like I haven't had any of them, have that level of like refusing to go anywhere or do anything, because at a young age, they feel like a strong sense of like partnership, and they know that like I value them, and that, we've done things incrementally, and I'm always thinking about their mindset and how they're feeling about it. And I try to like push them, but never too far where, like I'll notice, like, for instance, early on, I took one of my fillies out because she'd been riding out alone from the property fine by herself. And then I took her on a trailer ride and then rode her at a haul out by herself. And she was okay, but she was calling out a couple times. And I decided I didn't want to keep doing that because I didn't want her to get soured to trailering. She didn't have a lot of trailering under her belt.
Yeah.
And she's the kind of horse that she reminds me a lot of Dakota, but high energy. And so I'm like, she will for sure test boundaries if she decides that she doesn't like something. And so I was like, I don't want to make her not like trailering because that will then be a bigger problem for me. So from that point on, I then started always taking a buddy out with her, even if I was just ponying. Like, she was a very easy horse, even as a youngster, to like pony off of. So I was like, okay, I'll bring a buddy for you, and I'll keep riding you alone off the property where you're comfortable riding in like the neighborhood. And we'll just do that and just give it some more time, like a couple more months. And then just last week, I took her out for the first time since the fall.
She was great.
By herself. Yeah. And she was like, she didn't cry once. She felt calm. She was walking on a loose rein. And it was just one of those problems that took care of itself by just letting her get a little bit more comfort, both with like me as her partner and keeping her safe, and having more solo time in an environment that she felt more comfortable in. It just naturally progressed. But I was like happy that instead of just when she was clearly having like a uncomfortableness, instead of just pushing through it and then maybe developing a trailer problem, I was like, no, I really don't want a trailer problem, because I know her personality, and she's the type that like very, very loudly will like tell you when she has a problem with something. So I was like, okay, we will take a half step back and we will just give this some more time and practice, and we'll try it again in a couple months. And that's not something that I would have done with Dakota when he was younger, because I wouldn't have really realized what the problem was. I would have thought he just needs to do it more. And so it's hard for, I feel like, horseback riders when they're trying to figure this out, to know when do you push when a horse is telling you no, like with Dakota rearing at junctions. When do you get off and you continue down the path, or when do you maybe have to take a half step back? It's really hard. And it
is hard. And at some point, you just got to make a decision and then stick with it and see what it gives you.
Yes. And then if it's not working, then be willing to
try
reevaluate.
Again. Yeah.
It was so quickly an instant thing for Dakota of like, we went a couple 100 feet and I hopped on, and then no more rearing. That was like, oh, okay. Cool. That was an easy one.
Love it.
Yeah. So, and possibly with my filly, if I had kept riding her out alone, maybe she wouldn't have developed a trailer issue. Maybe it all would have been okay, but there wasn't a rush, and it just felt like, why not just give her a little more time? Like, nothing bad will come from me, taking out a buddy and ponying off of her when we ride, so she can get more familiar with this trail system with a buddy, and she can get more solo time in an area she's already comfortable. And then I'll take her to this area alone, and hopefully it'll go better. And that worked too. Like, it's possible either outcome or either solution would have had the same outcome. So sometimes there isn't only one right answer either. Sometimes there's multiple right answers, and you just have to make sure that if you're going down a certain path and it's not turning out the way you want, that then you're okay with like scrapping that plan and doing things differently.
Right.
And I think that's where sometimes horse people have a hard time, is like knowing when to quit something.
When to do it. I have a few rules that I teach that I'm happy to share here. Maybe you feel the same, or maybe someone listening likes them. But I have a rule of threes. So there's been a universal horsemanship knowledge that I've noticed in classical riders, in dressage riders, in jumping riders, in long distance riders, in all sorts of disciplines. I've heard this reoccurring theme from the similar quality of echelon of trainers, and they talk about this rule of threes. that if you ask 3 times and the horse doesn't consolidate by the third ask, then they're not going to consolidate it that day, and you need to either change the question or move on entirely. And
Ooh, I
also,
love that.
if you're looking to repeat a behavior that was already done well the first time and you want to repeat it to build strength and duration, don't repeat it more than 3 times. And then the horse starts feeling like you're drilling. I adhere to that. I ask once, twice, 3 times. I try to believe the horse the first time if I can. I really try to. Not always got the condition to do so. If I don't believe them the first time, I'll believe them the third. It's really helpful when I'm teaching because we'll ask a question of the horse and they'll give us the first response and we'll go, okay, to make sure that wasn't a fluke, let's repeat. Second time, the horse gives us the similar, maybe not exactly the same, but similar response. We say, okay, great. And then the third time they give us a similar response, we say, there's a consolidated understanding. Now let's look at the variables between those 3 responses. Was the horse stopping shorter, stopping faster? So you can look at the variables and understand how they're thinking. So I do a rule of 3s. And then I also have the rule of the 10, 15, and 20-minute horse. So I believe that a horse that can stick with one subject for 20 minutes, uninterrupted, without having a tantrum, if they can stick with one subject, be it energy work across a field or be it doing a long trot across open country, if they can stick with that for 20 minutes and not keep needing you to check in with you or trying to finish the task or whatever, that horse has a fully developed mental fitness for concentration. But that's something you have to build for. Unless the horse has got it off the bat, then that means it's their natural talent. If they've got that off the bat, if that horse is in on something for 20 minutes with no practice, that's their talent. But if you need to develop a skill that isn't their talent, well, set the timer. If you are at the 10-minute point and the horse starts getting wiggly, you're on borrowed time. You're on borrowed time. So start looking to close it. If you're at 10 minutes and they haven't gotten wiggly on you yet, if they haven't started wigging out, fine, go to the 15-minute. If at 15-minute point they start wigging out, okay, stop there. If you can get to 20 minutes, you've succeeded. And there are very, very specific ways you can actually build this in. Like you can actually set timers on your phone to like test this out. And it's got some legs. And then I started working with this concept for a few years. And then I started doing sessions where I didn't time myself, but I was filming myself. God damn, every time I looked at the footage, I was stopping those sessions with 20 minutes on the clock, 20 minutes on the clock, 20 minutes on the clock with each subject that I was introducing to the horses. And then you're able to kind of loop trainings in this way. So if you've only got 25 minutes, well, that's 20 minutes to work on a single subject. If you've got an hour, okay, and I've got a fully concentrated horse, they're able to go 20 minutes, great. I can just loop 3 subjects for the next hour with that horse, you see? But if my horse isn't there, then you need to be working under that 10, 15, 20-minute premise until the horse is developed to that point. So there are certain rules. Like if they say that inspiration is what you use when you don't have technique, and technique is what you use when you don't have inspiration. So kind of flip-flopping between the two. And I've often found that inspiration is a great way to find technique. And that's kind of what you're talking about. I mean, you don't ride horses over the distance and the challenges that you do without building technique from pure inspiration, from passing through these challenges with your horses, right?
Yeah. And it's so funny that rule of 3 that you say, like some horses, they'll say no to something like jumping a tree, and it comes from like a lack of confidence.
Right.
And sometimes it still has the same outcome. Like often it does, like just because your horse is physically capable of jumping something in particular, if they don't have the confidence to commit to it, they're probably going to fumble it. And you shouldn't then be asking anyways. And so that's always something I bear in mind. Like there's definitely different horses I have, and just based on their confidence levels and their kind of like coordination, even though it's not a very difficult obstacle for maybe a different horse, like that horse can't do that safely. And I have to like keep that in mind. And like with my most like coordinated horse, Dakota, he's like a very good jumper.
I've seen those videos of him on the trails jumping these enormous logs from a standstill.
I operate with the rule of 2 for him, where sometimes we get to an obstacle, because sometimes he honestly just blows me away for what he can jump. And so there'll be times where I'm definitely asking for too much, and I'm just genuinely kind of curious. Like I remember in Oregon in 2022 in our last Mexico to Canada ride, there was this really huge downfall, and it was on an uphill. And so, he was having to jump really big to get over the tree and land on the uphill. That's like, physics is all working against him. And I knew that like chances were a big fat no. And, so I operate with like the rule of two where, I'll ask him once and if it's a big jump, he'll pretty much always say no the first time. And I interpret that as him saying, this looks really freaking hard. Is there another option? Like, can we do a different solution to this? Like, if it's easy, can we just do something else? And if there is no evident second, like I'm usually not even going to ask him to do something difficult if there is an easier option. So usually it's no, Dakota, unfortunately, like this is kind of like, this is my idea, like, and I knew he was probably going to say no to it. And then when I asked him a second time, he always really looks at it. Like he like sticks his head over and he's like trying to scope out his landing spot. He might even like do like kind of like shift his weight on his haunches as if he's like contemplating like lifting his front end. And if he tells me no after that, I know it's like he physically doesn't feel like he can execute it. And like usually when I'm asking him something like this, it is a super difficult jump. And I am 100% expecting him to basically say no. And if he says yes, then I just basically have my jaw on the floor. Like, I can't believe you jumped that. Like I've had that a couple times where on the second go, he does launch himself over these huge trees. And I'm just like, how
did you do that?
Yeah. And I'm just amazed. So when he says no, because I've seen what he can do, I know it's a very honest no. And it's, it's him physically being like, I can't do this safely. And so then I think I spent like an hour and a half with like a saw breaking a trail around that downfall for him. And we got across it. But, I had first spent, I think, like half an hour trying to scout different ways around it. And I couldn't. And so that's then when I asked him the two questions, like, do you possibly be superhuman or super horse and jump this? And he's like, no, I'm sorry, I can't. And then it was like, okay,
get the saw out.
Yeah, now I'm going to get the saw and I'm really going to like invest a lot of time into seeing if I could find a route. Because before I was like looking, but I wasn't looking as hard as I could have in terms of like, what can I saw through to get through this? And once he said no to the jumping, I was like, okay, I had a feeling that was going to be your answer. And now I guess I will go back to the drawing board and I will figure this out. But I appreciate so much his like honesty and like, he knows that like when I ask him to do something, it won't be a force. And I know when he tells me no, it is so honest. And like I said, it's even honest when it comes from my less physically capable horses, because for their level of coordination or confidence, they probably physically can't do it. Like sometimes if you push a little, they'll jump it and they'll do it safely. And then that's how you build confidence. So especially with some of the lesser confident horses, depending on what the obstacle is, I might give a little bit more pushback and be like, you can really do this. And especially, I won't ask them to push their confidence on anything that is actually dangerous. Like if the tree is on a drop off where they have a chance of like rolling down a cliffside, that is not the time where I want my horse to jump something without confidence. Yeah. If it's like a flat log and there's no cliffs to fall off of, no rocks, that's the time where I'll be like, I think this is a good learning opportunity for you to figure out that you are capable of more than you think you are. Like, let's really try to give this a go. So like, those situations, I'll push back a bit more and try to encourage them to develop their coordination and confidence. But definitely when it's like a danger, where there's any risk of things going sideways, that is not the time where if my horse gives me a no, I'm going to say, I think you could do this. Like, it's really not that big.
Yeah,
but if their confidence is there, I'm like, so.
You're not suicidal. There's this great book called Schifferly's Ride. It's by have you read Schifferly's Ride? This crazy Swiss man who rode from Argentina to New York with these two little Argentinian ponies. And I might be butchering this story, but there was one story he told where he was up in the mountains in the Andes somewhere, and there was like the trail, there was like a washout in the trail, and it required him and his horses to make this huge leap over a chasm, like something out of a movie. But this was actually his life. And he looked at the leap and said, nah, there's no way. Well, I'm going to have to turn around and I'm going to have to circumnavigate this entire pass. And his pack horse, who is this obstinate little Argentinian pony, as he was heading back down his trail, the pack horse just looked at the chasm and just leapt it. And so he's like, shit, now my pack horse is on the other side of this chasm. I don't have the confidence to jump it. My horse just did it. Like how he didn't understand how the horse had managed to do it. So he had to jump it. He had to jump it and just, pray to God that the horse he was riding could manage to do it. An amazing, amazing story. Amazing story.
Yeah, that's kind of how I learned that Dakota was a good jumper. It's very similarly where we were only like about 200 miles into our first Mexico to Canada ride, and there was
only 200 miles.
This is like the first week, basically. Still, okay. I guess we were just after the first week's threshold, and I had spent that first week basically trying to kind of like ease my way into it because I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And so I had started on my mom's spring break, and there's a lot of road crossings in desert environments. Like you don't usually have huge expanses where there's like nothing. Like there's always a dirt road, usually multiple dirt roads, if not paved roads that you cross like every single day on these kind of long distance trails through desert environments. And so, I would cross roads and I could kind of plan on meeting my mom at nighttime. So that way I didn't have to like camp out overnight with my horses, which was something I was obviously very nervous about since I had no experience in it. And I kind of didn't even really know how to like read maps and determine what would be a good campsite. Like it all looked like Chinese to me, a bunch of lines and different colors on a map. How does that translate into reality?
Packed up and hit the trail and not really knowing what you're doing. You're like, I'm going to find out.
I wanted to be more prepared. I did. I did have aspirations of it, but it kind of got bungled by Shila, who got an injury 11 months before we started, and it was a check ligament that she had. I can't remember if she had fully torn it or if it was a partial, and I don't know why. It was obviously not a very good vet, but the vet that had first consulted on it, said, she'll be out for a couple months, and by the fall, you'll be able to like bring her back into work. So in my brain, I'm like, when I first decided to do the trip in the summertime, in my brain, I was like, okay, Shila will be back into work in another like 3 months. And then we'll have, basically almost 6 months, maybe not quite, I guess maybe 4 months, but we'll have 4 months to practice the techniques. And, maybe I can go on an overnight somewhere. It'd be my backyard. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But that all never even materialized because she ended up not being sound to start coming back until like January-ish. And then she kept having, she'd go like 6 weeks and then she would come up lame. And she was really hard to bring back because she was just being so explosive. Like I'd had her for 9 years at this point, and she had never bucked once when I'd had her. And then when she was coming back into work at this rehab facility that I was boarding her at, because I was still in college, and when I tried to keep her at the university, all the other horses going out to go on rides, and especially her son going out to go on a ride, really bothered her. Like she was not a horse that did well on stall rest. Like this was a disaster. And so I took her from my university to this rehab facility because they had a hot walker, they had a treadmill, like they could do things that would kind of like in a more controlled way try to bring her back. Mm-hmm. And she was doing pretty well on the hot walker. Like she would get out on it, at this point before I'm starting to then bring her back, she'd been out on it for 1 to 3 hours a day. So, which again, not her cup of tea, but at least she was getting some movement. And so it seemed like, okay, now the next logical step is to try like hand walking and riding. And that was just a disaster. It was so bad. She was so spooky, so reactive, like a leaf blower, a car. She developed this like intense fear of cars that never even fully left her. But like we would be way on one side of the property and the main road that's acres and acres away, just driving by on the road would like set her off, and she would, buck and bolt. If I was hand walking her one time, she tried to bolt ahead of me and she got just far enough away that when she kicked out, she got me like right in the gut. And I remember just feeling like I don't even recognize who
It
this
happens to the
horse
best of
is.
us. It happens to the best of us.
And I'm supposed to be taking this horse from like Mexico to Canada.
It happens to
And
the
so
best of us.
obviously, yeah. So in my head, I'm like, this is not going to go well. And so I started trying to basically prepare Dakota to maybe do it just riding. And I really didn't think that I could ride just him and carry the gear I would need and everything. But I was like, maybe it's possible if I get like a light enough weight gear. Like I'm at least I basically got 2 different systems of equipment. I got all the pack stuff in case somehow Shila was better in time for me to pack Dakota. And then I also got like some saddlebags, and I tried to get gear that maybe I could somehow put all on one horse and we could travel without a pack horse in case somehow it was just me and Dakota. Mm-hmm. That was kind of like what I was basically trying to figure out at that stage and through, the spring. And then March came and we were supposed to leave in April. And I was basically leaving the university. I had graduated my bachelor's, and my mom showed up, and it was just like, okay, well, we're going to go back to like Topanga for the last 30 days of prepping before I then go to Mexico. And Shila was still not under regular work at this point. Like she was still having intermittent lameness. And so I'm just like, she's probably not going. Like I'd kind of resigned myself to it somehow being me and Dakota, which I didn't have a lot of faith in us being able to accomplish together. Because me and Dakota's partnership, we had just been getting through the like pushback phase, and we still had like, he was still a much more resistant horse. And like, I was still like, our partnership was like, way, way lower than where it was with Shila. So the idea of trying to do something that I'd never done with a horse that like I was not on such a good level with was like, that it was not I was not feeling confident. And so I got Shila home, and from that moment I got her back home, she was completely back to her usual self. Like she never bucked again, ever. From that moment on, like, it was just like, she had so clearly associated being at that rehab facility with being confined and being stressed and being just like triggered by everything. Like I remember every time we tried to do a lameness exam at the rehab facility where they put these little lameness locators on them, and then they're supposed to like trot and, have the locators like confirm.
Forget it.
She'd become up lame on like 3 out of 4 legs. Yeah. Because she's like tossing her head and she's jigging and she's just, basically the handlers, like she's like flying around. She was a nightmare to deal with. And it was embarrassing for me because like here she is at this like facility that, they're trying to help her, and she's constantly having like even her heart rate. Like, they put her on the, what were you going to say?
She's talented. Talented horses are like this. What was her breed, by the way?
Quarter horse.
Yeah,
but I feel like quarter horses are the most varied breed in terms of like personality. Like there's definitely not a lot that are this hot. Like in her level of endurance too, like we could go gallop for 5-6 miles straight on the beach, like full sprinting, like not cantering, like galloping, breezing, and she could go miles and miles of breathing in sand and then turn around and go back and do it again. Like I feel like, if I'd had the science or opportunity, like I'd always like wondered if she was almost like Secretariat and had like some physical anomaly, because she was just not normal. And even the way she was built, she was very deep chested and then kind of like, narrow towards her hips. Like she just like, triangle shaped, and she just had this super deep chest. And I was like, I wonder if she's got like a bigger heart or bigger lungs, like some sort of physical thing that's giving her a leg up on all the other horses I know. But once we got her home, she obviously remembered being relaxed in that environment. She knew what that place was, and she just let go of all that baggage that she was carrying with her. And it's like it left her body too, because they would put her on the treadmill at the rehab facility, and they would do a heart rate monitor, and right around, I forget how many minutes she would make it on the treadmill before suddenly she'd have like this heart rate spike, which is how they would determine that there was like a pain associated with it. And that's when they would then say, she's having these heart rate spikes. You have to put her back on stall rest and try again. And so I obviously didn't want to push it, because I'm like, what if she's in pain? And she's a very stoic horse, and her heart rate spiking is pain. And I still can't tell you entirely what it was, but I do know the minute I got her home, she was
settled,
never anxious again, and she was never lame again. But we only had now 30 days. And like, I'm like
wow,
the entire time, I think I had gotten her up to, and I still wasn't even like cantering her at all. You know, I'm like trying to not push it. You know, I'm finally getting a horseback that I can like walk and trot. And I think I probably had her up to, like we were probably doing like 7 miles, 10 miles by the time we went to the Mexican border. And she wasn't acting fatigued. I mean, I don't think Shila ever acted fatigued in her life. And she had been walking like 3 hours at a time on the hot walker. So
right.
she had some fitness. I think just naturally, like she was a freak of nature, but I was still scared getting to the border that, you know, she's like, at this point, I had never even ridden. I think the biggest ride I'd ever done was 15 miles. So I had never ridden 20 miles. And like day one, I knew I had to cover 26 miles. And like day two, I
Oh
knew
my
I had to
God.
cover like 20 something else miles. And day three was another, like all of my days were over 20, 25 miles, like from day one. And so I'm sitting there like, this is going to be a disaster.
Right.
And so I made sure that my mom could come with me to get started on her spring breaks. That way, my idea was to kind of both ease myself into it in terms of like the camping side of things. Cause now I've been so fixated on getting Shila better that I've done, aside from buying gear and reading books, like in terms of actual practicing techniques and in person, like that did not happen. I set my tent up in my backyard and I set up a high line in the backyard and like called it good. Hadn't even like practiced boiling water.
Well,
I was fixated. I practiced getting Dakota trained. Like that was my other big thing is once Shila was better, it was like, oh, we have to get Dakota comfortable packing. And so
right.
my priorities were entirely on getting Shila going again and getting Dakota comfortable with the pack saddle, and getting him comfortable with the pack saddle took longer than I had thought it was going to take, which looking back, he was actually very quick about it. It was, again, more my approach that didn't like set him up for success. So when it first didn't go well, I was like, okay, we need to like take many steps back and build it up. And then when I built it up slowly, he did better. Like obviously, again, I had a few weeks and I got him good at packing in a few weeks. So I will say he was still pretty darn quick. But in my brain, because he was so unflappable and unspooky, I was like, oh, I'm going to put some boxes on him and we're going to be good to go. Because again, I've never seen anyone pack. I had no experience. I'm learning through YouTube, and like the guy who sold me my pack saddle, like on the phone telling me what book to buy. He's like, go buy this book. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. So I'm not doing anything correctly.
Wow.
But I'm listening to the horse. Like that was at least one thing I was good at, was when Dakota was like, you suck at this. Like that was not fun. I was like, I'm so sorry. Let's go back and do this a little differently. So they were my focus, trying to get them ready. And I trained them to be hobbled, and I, trained Dakota to pack, and I was packing him off of Shila as I'm conditioning her on like the trails in my neighborhood, basically in LA. And like that was most of my focus. So lots of other things were not going well, especially the planning side of things. Like I had all these maps all over my kitchen and I was just overwhelmed. Like it was like I said earlier, it was like all Chinese to me. And I realized that all the time I was probably putting into looking at maps and planning was probably all going to get scrapped the minute I got out there, because I was so bad at it. And I was so naive that I was like, this is not the best use of my time. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have 2 weeks. It's not going to happen. Like, I'm just going to have to like put my time elsewhere. So yeah, I got to the border and then basically was like, I need my mommy to like hold my hand through these first few days. And so she would meet me at road crossings. So like the first day I rode Dakota 20 miles, and then I met her at a road crossing, and then switched out for Shila and rode Shila the last 6 miles. And then day 2, I rode Shila 16 miles and then rode Dakota like 7 miles. Like I switched them out a little bit as I got started for the first week. And I remember, I mean, very slowly, like not by what most people would consider this. Like I think day 4, I rode Shila her first like big day. We did 25 miles because there was no road crossing. So I couldn't switch out a horse on that day. And so I had ridden Shila the day before, only 7 miles, and I'd ridden Dakota like 17. And then day 4, it was like, there's no road crossings for 21 miles. And so I rode Shila that full like 21 miles, and she did great. And I remember that we went to a horse hotel after that, and there was a big pasture, and we turned about, and she's just racing. And it's the first time she's galloped in about a year. It's the first time she's been turned out in a big area. And the entire time I'm just like, she's going to like blow her ligament again.
Nope,
like,
and she didn't. She loved
it.
Like,
what horse is zooming around for like an hour after having ridden her like 20 something miles for the first time in her life? And
that's
after
what she
coming
loved.
off of,
that's what she loved.
She was an absolute ridiculous athlete, like just the definition of an athlete. So after that, and after seeing how she still had so much fire after doing a 20-mile day and all that running, not injuring her, like I gave her the next day off because again, I was paranoid that she was going to hurt herself. But then, the whole next day she had off and she was fine. She didn't get injured, no swelling. That's when I think I finally had my first like breath of like, okay, her body is
ready,
getting better. Yeah, like I just felt so distrusting because there were so many times before that where she looked like she was getting better, and then oh nope, surprise, like she's not getting better, put her back on rest. And so I was just convinced that it was going to happen again. And I think I was pretty much like that. Like I had the first sigh of relief after her doing a big day and being like, okay, her body can hold up to a big day. But there would still be like a usually hard day where then I'd go back to being like anxious and staring at her legs for, days afterwards, looking for any hint of swelling and the like where her ligament was. And she never ever was lame again. So she held up. But I had my mom with me for the first like 10 days on trail. And a week into it, there was finally a stretch where like the road that, there was too difficult for her to get her truck down. And so there was a horse corral on that area. And so I was like, I'll just ride overnight to this horse corral and we'll camp there and then we'll proceed on. So I was like, my first overnight, but it's going to be an overnight to a corral. So again, this seemed like a nice, like big
easing into it. Yeah.
And it was on this section where Dakota was packing for his first time actually doing an overnight and not just packing in the local LA area for a day ride. So this is his first overnight. And we were running late, and as happens, and I ran into a lot of trees, and we got to this one part where there was nowhere to tie a horse to, and there was a tree across the trail. And I was like, okay, I'll just have to like, get off of Shila, and Dakota's just going to have to be loose and wait for me. And I'll lead Shila around the tree, and then and it was a very steep slope. But I didn't think that they could jump. And Shila was not much of a jumper. It took Shila a long time to find her jumping legs. So I led her around the tree, and then I had to go a ways down the trail before I could finally find a tree to tie her up to then go back and go get Dakota. And like leaving Dakota, this is like almost that same thing with the pack horse jumping the big gap. Dakota was like panicking. He was just like, Mom, I cannot believe you left me. And he is very smart. And so he did not think that going down around the tree looked very safe. And so he just launched himself over this tree with like hack saddle and everything. And I'm coming back down the trail to go get him. And like, I just see him pop over this tree. And I'm like, how? Like, I didn't know you could jump, let alone I didn't know you could jump with like your packs on. And I never even asked him to do it. And so it was like from that moment on, then I was like, oh, that's his like superpower is jumping and making really good decisions in terms of like deciding like what is the safer route. And he's one of the few horses that will pick a safer route, even if it's physically harder. Like most horses, when deciding where to go, they will pick the physically easier route that sometimes ends up being more dangerous because they don't, it's down a steep hill and they think jumping's harder. So they're like, I'm going to go down this steep hill. And then it's like too steep for them to get back to the trail. And like a lot of horses will get themselves in trouble with that. But Dakota's one of the few horses where he can like make the conscious decision of like that going down that hill is physically easier, but I don't think I can physically make it back to the trail. Like that level of foresight is wild to me in a horse. And I haven't had a horse that does that but him. But then he'll decide, but I'll jump this 3-foot tree, even though it's a lot of physical effort because it's safer, in the end. And so he like earned my respect so much, like that first week when he just jumping that one tree, just the level of understanding that he showed and athletic ability and coordination. I was like, I found your superpower. Like he had always been the horse compared to his mom that was very like unathletic. And he was the one that, like I needed to have boundaries with, and he get pushed back a lot on stuff. And then there was his superpower, like
jumping,
making really good decisions and jumping. And I was like, I just like developed such a new level of appreciation for him in that moment. And it was one of those like, okay, like that is definitely the job that like you are playing on this journey. Like that is your superpower. But yeah, it's like what you were saying about the pack horse jumping. Like sometimes they like amaze us with when they have the confidence in their physical ability, like what they will do of their kind of like own choice. And they really can show you, the right horse can like really show you like what they're made of. You don't even have to necessarily ask them to do it. Like they will just do it all on their own without you even asking.
Yep. My horse, Sunny, he looks like an overgrown Shetland pony most of the year. And people underestimate him because he's, a draft cross and they think he's, whatever. And I remember once this is before you followed me, we were in Poland and we were at a jumping stable. We were liverying at a jumping stable, and there was like a drained water ditch with a big jump, like an eventing ditch thing. And it had probably imperial, it would have been 4 foot, 5 foot sort of straight up bank.
Wow.
And everyone was underestimating him. So I just rode him into that drained out water obstacle and took him right up to that bank. And I said, Sunny, up. And he went straight up it and just popped up and then walked like tossing his mane over his shoulder like, yeah, no problem. I got this. He's got that as well. Like he's a hill horse. You show him a hill and he just goes straight up it,
Some horses do have a better understanding of like even just how to use their body like weight. I feel like, like my mule's really good at understanding how to like on steep slopes, how to like change her counterbalance so that she has more stability. And I feel like when a horse has that, even if they look like they're more like ground bound horses, they can actually be really good just because of their body control. Like a horse that has really good body control can do things better, even if they don't look athletic, than a horse that maybe doesn't have the coordination or the body control. Even if they like, people think that my Arabian must be like my best long distance horse. And like, God bless her. Like she's a very sweet horse, but she is not she grew up in like a, she's like a backyard breeder's horse. And so she didn't do anything for the first 10 years of her life. So her level of like proprioception and body control and everything didn't start developing until she was in her like teens. And yeah, it's, come a long ways, but still nowhere near where it is for horses that get to have that their whole lives. So like love her, but definitely would not at all call her my most like athletic horse. And like my mule, who looks a lot like Sandy in terms of, and again, she's a mule and she has got really good body control. Like I wouldn't say she's as sure-footed as Dakota. I feel like Dakota is a really like, he thinks things through a lot with safety. And my mule, I think she understands that she's indestructible, and she'll definitely be like, is that like a yummy piece of grass down there? Like, that's okay. Like, I'm going to go get it. Like, I'll survive. So sometimes she makes questionable choices, following her stomach somewhere. But she always does come out unscathed because she's got such good body control that, even if her choices are questionable, she, like, I've seen her scale things and it's like, that's ridiculous. And she'll literally just drop to her knees to keep her center of gravity where she needs to. And she'll like crawl on her knees if she needs to get where she wants to go, because she just understands body control. Like when we've been on really slick rock in the Sierras in California, they just have these like slabs of rock, and they can be really slick for horses. And I've never had a horse, including Dakota. Like even when Dakota's crossing it, if he starts to slip and slide, it's like, a deer on ice where they're just like legs going places and they're kind of doing too much. And like that will be pretty much every horse's response, including Dakota, who I think is a very smart horse. But Carly fascinated me when I took her in the Sierras after I'd had her for like a month. And we got to this rock slab where she and Dakota both started like losing their footing. And Dakota was like doing the deer thing and he managed to like get himself stabilized. But Carly literally just laid down. Like she didn't think twice about it. She was like, oh, I can't fall if I'm already on the ground. So I'm just going to lay down.
Smart girl.
And I was like, that's genius. That was like the first moment where I was like, okay, I see where this mule intelligence comes from. And that's quite often like what she'll do. If she feels at all like she's like losing balance or insecurity, she just lays down. She has no qualms about it. She's like, I can't fall and get hurt if I'm already laying down.
Fair. Yeah, I relate to her very, very much. It's amazing. It's amazing what you did. I didn't know that you felt so unprepared and rushed for your first long distance trip. And now it's like what you do. You're really experienced and you've learned by rote and you've made the mistakes and learned from it. It's the best way to learn. But like I know my audience to a certain extent, and everyone's clutching their pearls right now. Everyone. For you. Everybody's clutching their pearls right now going, safety, 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 safety. Like, have you ever had something happen on a trail where shit really hit the fan? And hold that thought. I'm just going to go to the bathroom and be right back. Is that all right?
Okay. Yes, no worries. Yeah. I got to get a glass of water anyways.
Okay. Go get a glass of water.
Okay. Getting a glass of water. We still came. I was just nervous myself listening to the Saturday. I was like, oh, I know we messaged about it. We agreed for on this day. I was like, hopefully he's in his head in a state. Yeah, but I was worried that then his phone was going to give him a reminder. Right. That goes to your Google Calendar. All worked out.
All good?
Hello. Yep.
I'm loving this. I'm transfixed by your story.
I feel like I never even fully answered the whole question of like,
no, that's the point. You are answering it. It's just it takes time to answer it. You're living my dream.
I'm one of those huge like tangent people too. Like once I get going down a rabbit hole, I rant and sometimes then I'll like realize like you totally like went way off the rails, Gillian. I'll try to suddenly loop it back around.
I love it. I love it. I love the way you think. And it would never be my desire to put you in a box that way. Like you're living my dream. In my heart, I'm a trail rider. In my heart, I'm a trail rider. As
you still are a trail rider.
I know, but I do a lot less of it than I used to. And there was a part of me that had to have like an identity / ego death to being like riding my horses in the mountains, because I realized like that opportunity was presented to me in many ways. I was presented the opportunity where I could have folded in a business where I would have had limitless access to glorious horses and one of the last untouched wilderness regions of Spain. I could have gone in that direction, or I could have set it up myself in that direction. I mean, I had that all at my fingertips, and I chose to walk away from it because I've had to admit that I've got this other thing going on where I'm here to serve other people with other things and other problems, and lend my brain and my hands and my body and my knowledge of horses so far to another dream. And so trail riding is something that I do for me that's kind of sometimes and frequently put on the shelf because I'm busy with a business, and all I want to do is as much as possible, as long as possible, as appropriately as possible for the horses is go out into nature and chill the heck out. And we're really blessed in our current location. It's, dairy farmland all around us. And it's we're not in a wilderness region, but we have this couple of 100 hectares of nature preserve and logging forest, like 2 kilometers walk down the road. So it's like a 20-minute walk to the forest, and then it's just trails. And before I bought
the trails
this,
you have look like they're quite like you can actually run on them. Like that's sometimes the problem I have with some of the trails that I have access to is they're like walking only because they're just too
and there's
rugged,
a good aspect to that too.
Variability.
There was a good aspect because you ride in the mountains too. You and I both know that if you've got a high energy horse that discovers a problem in real time on a trail, and their solution is maybe to go at speed, all you have to do if shit hits the fan is point their nose uphill and wait them out, and eventually they'll find their brakes. I don't have that anymore. It's wide open country, beautifully groomed trails, and flat. So it's just like being in Poland years ago. I know that once I get my horses fit, that if problems arise and speed is the solution, there's nothing to stop them except technique and communication. So that requires a whole other strategy, which I've been through before, but it requires a whole other strategy to prepare them for a trail when the trails are of this kind of quality, when you're not held back by the terrain, which is what I had in my previous environment. Like where we were before, all of the trails we had there were either ridiculous uphills. And there came a point where Sani looked at me and said, I'm sick of hills. Can we just find something flat? But then we would go out on the river, and it was basically rock climbing on flat. It was just boulders. You're just bouldering. And that was our trail, which was fine. So it's lovely to have firm logging roads to just go head out into. And if I went far enough, we could find some hills. But even Sani's gotten to a point where he's like, I think I've scratched my hill itch, because last time I took him out to the hill, we went up the hill. We got up there and he turned and looked at me and said, Lockie, I don't need to do this anymore. Not right now. I want to settle in a different way. And I was like, okay, buddy, we go home. And
I do relate to that on an extent, because I did like all these big Mexico to Canada rides very early on. And especially like right when I got started, it was like, I don't know how else to compare it to like basically being like a drug for my brain in terms of the level of just like feeling like you're alive. Like, highs,
adrenaline,
lows. Yeah, there's adrenaline, and then just like a deep sense of like purpose and presence, and I could feel so laser focused on a goal. And like so often in like regular life, I deal with a lot of anxiety, sometimes depression, and getting myself motivated to do something. I feel like sometimes I'm my own biggest enemy in terms of just getting the ball rolling. And for whatever reason, when I go out on these Mexico to Canada trails, that does not happen. Like that part of me is gone. And like the part of me that's there is just like, she is so determined and she never gives up no matter how hard shit gets. Like I just liked the person I was out there a lot. Like all the parts
just like Shila.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Like
all the parts I liked least about myself at home, they all went away when I would get out there. And so I liked who I was out there, and I liked the feeling of purpose and feeling like I was accomplishing things and kind of not being my own worst enemy. And obviously then just all the other elements like the partnership and obviously getting to see beautiful places, like that's all other reinforcing, like keep doing this is great, feedback. But then something does start to happen. I would say like my first Mexico to Canada ride was really hard. I think I cried every single day. And there was lots of times where basically my own stubbornness was kind of like keeping me out there. Like there was times I liked it. Like it would be a mix. Like every day would have something that would be really beautiful or feel meaningful. And then there would also be moments where I was crying. And so it was very like huge swings in emotional states on my first ride. And I had heard from like, just kind of like a saying in the hiker community was like, don't quit on a bad day. Like wait till the bad day passes, wait till like you're warm and dry and fed before you then decide if you are going to quit. And every time I would get through the bad day and get to like a not bad day, and it came time to like, okay, am I going to quit? It was like, there would just be this like thing in my stomach that was like, and then this was where this kind of other mindset came in, which I don't know why I can't quite take this into the real world because it should be applicable. But what would end up happening in my head was I felt like there were so many obstacles stacked against me, like the trail, my horse's physical health, the weather. Like there were so many things that were completely out of my control that could just bring the ride to a stop. Like whether I wanted to continue or not, like the ride could stop in an instant for some reason that wasn't my control. And it felt like the only thing I had control over was whether or not I was like choosing to continue. And it was almost that like moment of like, I don't want to be the reason that like I don't do this. Like there's so many things that could stop this if it's not meant to be, that I won't do it. But why let like me be added on to that list of like reasons you won't complete the trail? And so again, it should be the same mindset that I can take to my normal life, but somehow it's a lot harder. Real life's a lot messier, and somehow out there in the like very hard but very simple trail life, it was, my brain was actually able to like internalize it and put it into practice of like, don't get in your own way. Don't let your own like kind of like questioning of if you can do this, like, you know, you let the rest of the universe decide if you finish the trail. Like your horse gets lame, you can't continue. Physical health reasons for your horse, you can't continue. Weather, Mother Nature. There's a whole list of things that could stop you from doing this. Like you don't need to also be on the list of reasons. And I was able to internalize that and put it into practice on those rides. Yeah, and I really liked that about myself. Like I said, it brought out a side of me that like I really, really liked. Like definitely I feel like the best version of me comes out there. So the first ride was a lot of like roller coasters in terms of like.
Let's take a break. I spend a lot of time talking about the problems in the industry. I talk about these problems because often we are sometimes the last people to know what's holding us back. And I think the pathway forward is about understanding what's holding us back, but then more importantly, aligning with effective solutions to move forwards. There are so many ways I would like to help you develop real solutions to move you forwards with your horse. The easiest and most cost-effective way to do that is to consider subscribing to the Emotional Horsemanship video library. For a small fee, you can access the Emotional Horsemanship video library, which has 200 videos and counting of everything from theoretical tutorials, insider glimpses to clinics, online courses, behind-the-scenes content, practical demonstrations, historical presentations, and so much more. The video library is the best way to begin integrating with me if you are just curious about what I'm doing over here and how that can translate into a practical skill set with very real solutions that you can implement with your horses to move you forwards. And now let's return to my episode with my friend Gillian Larson.
About myself. Like I said, it brought out a side of me that like I really, really liked. Like definitely I feel like the best version of me comes out there. So the first ride was a lot of like roller coasters in terms of like dealing with all the facts that I didn't know anything and being naive and trying to problem solve and having these emotional turmoil in myself of like wanting to quit, but like talking myself out of it. And so it was an emotional mess. And so I remember even too, when I was in Washington, like only a couple 100 miles from finishing, and a hiker had asked me, he's like, oh, are you going to do like, one of the other trails? Are you going to do this trail again? And I like laughed. I was like, are you kidding?
Nuts,
like, never. I'll never do this. It was so hard. Like, I'm just trying to like finish this thing. And I finished it, and then I was going into grad school, and I just hit a horrible depression. And you hear about hikers, it being common, like they get back into the real world, they call it like a post-trail depression that you'll hit. because just like, especially for the hikers, it's also like the lack of physical activity and endorphins like comes down a
Right.
lot.
Right.
So physically too, it's compounding with the hikers. It's less so from a horseback riding perspective where you're not doing quite the level of physical exertion. Although
But the horses
I feel
feel
like I
that
was,
too. The horses get that
especially
way
in
too.
yeah, and
They have
especially
that.
in like Washington, I feel like I was probably physically working harder than most hikers because it was so bad. So I probably did also have like some physical endorphins coming down, but it was just all of a sudden I went from being out on this trail and having this like soul intensive purpose of like get to Canada, finish the trail, like take care of your horses. And then I went to grad school and everything that I had just accomplished meant nothing.
Nothing.
Like no one cared in grad school about what I just done. And it was like, it consumed my brain. It felt like I had to just like lobotomize myself and like completely detach from this thing I had just spent like, 4.5 months like doing with like every fiber of my being. And now, you're having to
How
go
do
to
you go
grad
back?
school
How do you
and
go
you're
back?
having to like, yeah. And it was just, and I realized as I was in grad school that like, I got this big depression and I realized that what was happening was I was just like no longer like the actions I was doing and the path I was going down wasn't aligning with now where like my heart was. Like my heart just wanted to go back there. And it was realizing too, of course, hindsight is sometimes more rosy colored, but like looking back, I was like, I had really hard days, but those like ups that I was having was way better than kind of just like the flat line that I was experiencing in grad school. And there was a lot of toxic culture at this university. And so it was also other things that were making it like very unhealthy to be in. And I felt very trapped because like financially, I was on a scholarship and I didn't feel like I had other options. I felt like this was the path I committed to. I can't backtrack. And I know it seems so silly when you're in your early 20s to feel like you are like stuck, but
No.
it was at least the way I felt,
Yep.
in terms of it was like the only reality I had experienced. And just trying to like fight with that. I was always a bit, again, of a planner and I liked having a plan and I liked sticking to the plan and having to realize that my life plan was like causing me misery was hard to get my brain around. So eventually, after I saved up enough money, I left grad school after 2 years and went back and did my second Mexico to Canada ride. And that time I put into practice everything I'd learned from the first one. And my whole goal was basically to not want to quit in terms of I wanted to have a better experience where enjoy it, actually enjoy it, appreciate it better, like not constantly have in the back of my head wanting to quit, wanting to get off trail, having like this misalignment of like expectations and reality, which I think happens for pretty much everyone on their first long distance ride. But having like obviously my expectations more aligned with what I was going to experience because it was now my second time and having all the skills. I loved that second Mexico to Canada ride. I felt like I was a good horse partner. I felt like I, planned things out well. I felt like I understood what I was doing. Like I really felt truly accomplished. And that's then for sure when then it just like the long distance riding like got a hold of me and I was like, this is what I'm doing. And so I did multiple other like through rides on shorter trails. I did the Continental Divide Trail in 2018, and I felt really proud of how I did that trail. Like the horses had developed so much, especially Dakota, in terms of being like a really good partner. And I was just so proud of how we did that trail, how things went. I just felt like we had like achieved this like high level of partnership and ability and just like felt like unstoppable. And then I lost Shila the following year after that. And then that felt like my whole world just like stopped. At that point, I had like 13 years. Yeah.
Pause right there because I still remember where I was sitting when I opened Instagram and saw your post and your stories about how you lost Shila, because I was following you like on the edge of my seat. This glorious mare, this 1 in a million athlete, this talented, fiery, ferocious, quirky, challenging, beautiful mare who just was all ears again, getting you down that trail in record time, you know, all across the set. And there she was. And then I still remember where I was sitting and what I felt when I learned how she had passed. And I still feel that. You live rent free in my head. Shila lives rent free in my head. I can't imagine that and how that happened. But you know what? Like, how fitting.
I
how
know.
She went.
It was like you couldn't wish for a horse to go in a better fashion. Like, it felt too soon. And
it's okay.
I don't talk a lot about her because I can't really keep my composure very well.
It's okay. You don't have to talk about her if you don't want to.
I know, but I want to because it's important. But she passed on that ride, and she passed like so quickly and like painlessly. Like, it was so quick. And she was 21, and she at 20 years old had done her third Mexico to Canada ride.
Amazing.
Like, what horse
amazing.
does that?
Amazing.
And she did her first at 16, she started at 16, 18, 20. She did Mexico to Canada rides.
Wow.
And we were doing I forget, I'm trying to remember how many miles. I think it was like a 900-mile ride we were doing.
But that's probably why she was so good, because of her maturity while she got there. A lot of people would be thinking this is a young horse is doing this kind of trip. Far from it. Like, horses need to be fully developed in their skeleton and their soft tissues, which is post age 10. If we're being really real about it, horses' skeleton isn't until 6, soft tissues 8, postural abilities 10. Psychologically, I don't really feel like you get any ground with horses until they're like 12, 14. And then 15, 16 plus, I mean, prime of their life. In their 20s, they should be doing the best. That's what I think. And
Dakota is honestly quite similar to what you described. Like, Dakota did his first, Mexico to Canada at 7 as the pack horse, and he didn't finish it. Like, he did like maybe 1,200 miles, so about not even half of the first Mexico to Canada ride. And it's because his brain wasn't there. Like, he wasn't taking care of himself. Like, I would bring all this food with me in the backcountry, and I would like lay it out like a banquet, and he just like wouldn't eat it. He was too emotionally like the change of things. Yeah, overstimulated. And, and I was giving him all the food I could. It was a very slow like weight loss, but he got to the point where I was like, he's getting too lean. Like, I can't continue with him. And he basically then got to like just travel along with us, and I would like in different states find like a pasture for him and someone that would look after him, and I would like plop him in a pasture and
send the baby, get fat, and proper Shila adult 16, 18, 20-year-old, she would get it done.
Yeah. So like, I had all this gear for single horse packing. And then basically once I got to like Northern California, I've been basically with single horse packing Shila the whole rest of the way to Canada. And like, in a sense, because she had her injury, I had gotten kind of the mindset of like, what if Shila can't do this and it's just me and Dakota and I need to single horse pack it? Then like, lo and behold, Shila post injury ends up being the horse who does the whole trip, and Dakota, who's 7, doesn't even make it halfway, and 100%. He just mentally wasn't taking care of himself. And second ride, same thing. So now he's 9, and he did a little better, but like, I was obviously in my head, I was just thinking, okay, Dakota's just not a Mexico to Canada horse. He can do about 1,000-ish miles, maybe 1,500 if we get lucky. And then he's got to sit it out. And that's kind of what happened again. Like, he did a little better. He did about 1,500 miles. But the last like 1,000 miles I did with just Shila. And like, he didn't get too lean or anything, but he was still decreasing in weight. And it was just like, okay, go home. Like, I know how to do this without you helping us the whole time. And after doing those first 2 rides, that's just how I thought my system was going to be. And I didn't think I could do the Continental Divide Trail because I would need a pack horse for that one. And I was like, well, Dakota can't do that trail because he can't pack the whole thing. And so we did these 2 other smaller trips. And so he was 10, and we went out, and it was like a light bulb happened in his brain where from the first ride we did when he was 10, he was like taking care of himself. He had a whole new like Zen mindset to being out there. He was eating well. He was taking care of himself. And I attributed it to him just needing time to adjust. And for like some of my horses, that is it. And I think that was part of it, but also just mentally being more mature. Because obviously Shila didn't have any time to adjust. And he like, just adapted.
I can imagine being the fat baby and trying to keep up with Shila and you would be overwhelming to most nervous systems. I can imagine he was like, holy crap, I gotta keep up with these two forces in nature, you know. Yeah, no wonder he was like, God damn, I'm gonna jump that tree. And, you know, just did it, just like Forrest Gump, like over he went, you know, like God bless him. I love Dakota too. He's so adorable. And half the time he follows loose, like at Liberty, right?
Yeah, he was a very good loose follower because he made such good decisions. Like normally you can't let the horse loose for sometimes just ethical reasons in terms of the environment, because if they're loose, they'll go off trail and they'll damage the fragile alpine environment. And so like Carly will follow to an extent, but I don't let her off lead very often for just the fact that she kind of like wreaks havoc.
Okay.
Like
mule, standard mule. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. Like there's certain environments where, or she's just in the right mindset and we're like in a really remote place where I'm like, okay, you know, I'll see how you're doing. And where she does really well off lead is when there's a lot of obstacles. Like if there's a lot of trees to follow, like she'll finally then be like, okay, I should probably pay attention and I should really focus on things, and I'll stick close to the horse and I'll follow where the horse goes. And that's really important when you're like, you know, if you're in this big like mess of trees and there's like 50 trees and you're having to like go around them and over them. And, you know, I can't lead my horse and have him jumping trees and have the mule somehow attached to my horse as he's jumping trees. Like she's got to be on her own. And they get really bad anxiety if you like eye one up and then you're going like a quarter mile or more away through this mess of nonsense and then going back. Like it just creates so much anxiety. So if you have the right pack animal, that when like, you know, shit hits the fan, like they respond appropriately and they don't make things worse. And they're like, oh, this is serious. We need to pay attention. Like, got it. And Carly will do that. Like when it's necessary, she's on the ball. When it's not necessary, she's then just kind of like not the best for the environment with her like shenanigans. Like her favorite thing to do is to like hang back and stuff her face. And then once I've gotten far enough away from her, she'll just come galloping, you know, bucking and farting like the whole way down the trail, just like an absolute.
Yeah, but not practical from a trail riding perspective. No, we need to be more sensible.
Yeah, more sensitive to the environment, and especially if there's like other trail users, like this just, you know, can't be doing that, Carly. So usually she's on a lead, but Dakota was never like that. Whereas Dakota was always a very like mama's boy, and he like wouldn't even eat. Like we'd be going down the trail and he's loose and he won't even stop for snacks because he's like, I gotta stay with my mom. Like she moves fast. Like we gotta stick together. So yeah, he was just such a mama's boy. Yeah,
it's such an amazing partnership you had with those three, and it really with Shila, her son Dakota, and you, just like I can't think of a more iconic trio, frankly, and it really warms my heart now to see that after that loss. And it's clearly still, you know, raw for you, and it's raw for me. I can't imagine what it is like for you. That it warms my heart to see that you've continued and Dakota's still with you and you still do stuff together. And now you're taking on these young horses and you're developing them into trail buddies and you're giving workshops. It's now become a whole business for you. And I'm thrilled because I believe that the Shila's spirit and her influence and her teachings is alive and well. And for me, if it's all right with you, just to help you maintain your dignity on the podcast, I would just like to share with my listeners what happened to Shila, and just nod your head if I got it right.
It's probably easier if you say it.
Yeah, okay, exactly. Okay. So you were climbing up a mountain.
Yeah.
She got to the top.
We were going up to a pass. Mm-hmm.
Got to the top, massive heart attack. Or similar.
I think it was aneurysm.
Aneurysm.
Just because Sparky, my first horse, ended up in his 30s developing heart failure, and he passed of a heart attack in my arms.
And it looked different.
I witnessed what it looked, and he had 3 heart attacks before the third one knocked him out. And I was there for all 3, and his heart attacks were very different than what happened to Shila. So my theory is a brain aneurysm, because it wasn't even like her body was failing her. It was just like her brain shut off and she was gone. So that's why I've always theorized a brain aneurysm for her, because it was so quick. It was seconds.
She was looking at a view, doing what she loves best with her son and with her friend. And it was over. It was all over. And what a career. And I can't think of a better way for a mountain horse like her. I mean, you told the story yourself. She went to the rehab, went to the hospital, and they wrapped her in cotton wool and the heart testings and all the things. And she just kept getting worse and worse and worse, because there's mind-body-heart connection, right? Lameness can be self-reinforcing if there's not wellness in the animal, and wellness looks different for every animal. And for Shila, wellness was out with you doing stuff. And as soon as you took her out there, she just thrived. I mean, horses need movement, This is why I love trail riding. And this is why at some point I encourage a lot of my clients who perhaps are much more risk averse. At some point I encourage them to fuck around and find out and give something a go, because horses need movement, and horses need challenge, and horses can thrive on it. And they can not only survive challenge, but thrive and rise to the challenge. And it makes them healthier to have challenges sometimes. Not all horses are like Shila. Just like Dakota.
And Dakota too, though. Like a lot of
horses. You would never have found that in Dakota. You would never have found that.
I never would have. And some horses too, even if they aren't great at it at the start, just like Dakota, he was part of 2 Mexico to Canada rides. And only after those was then he's like, oh, I have found my groove. And he continued to get better until his teens.
Right.
And he really, like, even when, after Shila passed, and he now got promoted to my main riding horse. And I had my mule, and Dakota was definitely, it felt like a very big step down from Shila, because he didn't have this diehard, forwardness. And he wasn't really much of a leader in terms of, he was good with obstacles, but he just didn't seem to have that drive, just didn't have that burning passion that Shila had. And I was, just like, hey, there's no way he can be my main horse. Like, he just won't have that fire. And it was so interesting, because 6 weeks after, not even, I guess this is more, maybe 8 weeks after, Shila passed, I didn't want Dakota to be alone. Because obviously I went through that with Sparky, and I was like, I will not let my horse be alone. I don't have the emotional fortitude to get another horse, though, so I'm going to get
a mule. Oh, I love Carly. Yeah. She's so cute. Those ears.
Which couldn't be a more different creature than Shila. But so 3 weeks after Dakota had passed, I was basically, or not Dakota, after Shila passed, I was very much trying to compartmentalize my grief, and just, basically as soon as she passed, I was like, I have to have a companion for Dakota. And it felt so icky to be looking for another animal after losing Shila. And it was, again, a very big, like, having to dissociate in order to do it. And the only way I could really do it was by, like, going with a completely different animal. And, like, not even looking for a riding animal, just packing. And I was like, I'm doing it for Dakota. I'm doing it for Dakota. I'm doing it for Dakota, because
she's wonderful. She's wonderful. Yeah, Carly's awesome.
Yes, and it was a big learning curve to partner with her, because, again, very different animal. Especially, it just felt like it's kind of like starting over. It felt like, at least at that point, more of a step down, because now I was going from having my best riding horse to now, like, a horse that had less, like, I was riding Dakota, and he just had less drive. And then I was going from Dakota, who was just, like, the most intelligent, like, safe packing animal, always made good choices. Like, I basically never even had to think about him, to now Carly, who was just, like, naughtiness personified, and just, like, always up to mischievous things. And she had a lot more, like, at least when I first got her, was not very, like, work oriented, and just, I felt like I was literally dragging her up mountains. And so a month after, how far after? I guess it would have been like 6 weeks after Shila passed. It was almost the end of the packing season, and I got a permit for the John Muir Trail, which is really hard to get. And it was just like screw it. Like, I don't want to sit here in my grief for the whole rest of the summer. Like, I love the Sierras, and I was a little scared to go out there without Shila, but I just felt like I just kind of wanted to rip the Band-Aid off and just like go. And so I went out there with Dakota and Carly. And like I was trying to again disassociate from not trying to compare it to Shila, but it was hard, being with Dakota riding him. Felt like I was missing a big chunk of like, Shila would have done this differently. Shila would have been more enthusiastic. And so Dakota was still like a pretty slow horse. And then on that trip, he developed a horrible infection in his hop. And on our exiting out of that, he ended up tearing 2 ligaments in his hop.
Oh, no.
And it took him 13 months and like an intensive hospital stay to get rid of the infection, and then 13 months to heal his ligaments. And when he came back from that injury, it was just like this drive was just there that had never been there before. And he, just like there were definitely certain parts of his personality that had kind of changed a little bit. Like at that point, while he was completely, unrideable, I had the mule, who now was my only like creature. And I was like, well, I guess I have nothing better to do. I might as well try to train you to ride. And then I picked up my Arabian, who was neglected for her entire life. And I was like, sure, we'll just start with a mule that is 8 years old and has never been ridden, and a 11 or 12-year-old Arabian that has never even had her feet trimmed. And we will just like start all over. But it was so heartbreaking. I felt like I had never even started that low ever. Like even Dakota as a baby, it felt like I was starting lower than low. Like I wasn't back at ground level. I was like in the center of the earth of like trying to rebuild. Like how did I go from being able to ride?
So that's where I live.
Canada,
that's where I live, because that's where most of my clients live. They've got these horses. Yeah. They've got these horses. This is where most of the people I work with, that's where they live. So that's really where I'm trying to help people, because what you're speaking about up on mountains and all, I've been there too, less than you have, but I've been there too. It's for a lot of people is something that they can only look at. They never think to reach it. And because to develop a horse from scratch, not just scratch, but below scratch. Like,
yeah, because they have all this trauma and all the other issues. It's not even a baby horse. It's like an adult horse with mountains of baggage.
Wrecked up adult horse. And they don't even have like a pre-existing talent that's discernible, because they've been left in a paddock for years. So they don't have any relationship to their body or to work or to routine. Nothing. It's so hard to build them back up. Is Shila's still up there, isn't she? She's laid to rest up there, right?
Yes. Yeah. I don't like to talk about how they dispose of bodies, so we will leave that
out.
But yeah, her remains are still up there.
It's poetic.
It is, yeah, and it was one probably like I was riding on that ride from the Grand Canyon to Wyoming, and the view on that like pass was the prettiest thing that I had seen on the entire route, like prettier than even the Grand Canyon. And so, and still too, like I've gone back to the Uintas, the mountains that she passed in last summer, and it still is like one of the most magnificent passes.
Back.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get back to go visit her, both because of Dakota's injuries and finding, the time to make another trip out there. But yeah, it took me 4 years before I was finally had Dakota recovered and wasn't doing a Mexico to Canada ride. And I'd even tried one other year, the 2 years after she passed, I tried to go back and ended up, Dakota was his first summer back, and I took him, and he had just started getting rideable again. And I took him and Carly the mule, and then a young green mare that I was trying to get some miles on. And we hit like huge fire burns that I couldn't get through. And then we had an incident where Carly pushed my green mare off of a switchback, and she got a laceration on her like stifle. And so then we had to exit. And then we got to the trailhead, and my truck died. And then I was having to have a local come out and get me. And then I was stuck at a fairgrounds for a week with an injured horse. And
Yikes.
I'm heartbroken because I got like so close to where she was buried, but couldn't quite make it. And my truck is now stuck, and this is post COVID mechanical backlog. So my truck stayed in Utah for months, and my mom had to drive all the way from California out to
What a
northern Utah
mom.
to like come pick me and
Wow.
my mule and my two horses up and like take us back. And I felt like such a failure because I tried to go out there and see her, and now I'm coming home without a truck and with like one of my horses, with a like stitches and an injury, and just being like, this is terrible. Like, why can't I make it back to where I was? Like, it felt like such a long climb to get back there. And even in 2022, I did my first Mexico to Canada ride since she passed. And just with the team of horses I had, I knew, aside from Dakota and probably Carly, but none of them could like do the whole trail the way Shila had. Like, they just didn't have that in them. They weren't ready. And some of them probably just weren't going to be the horses for that anyways. And I really didn't want to shoulder that with Dakota. Like, he'd done so much and he had come off this really big injury. And I didn't want to ask him to go Mexico to Canada if there was an easier way to do it. And so I decided, while aside from him and my mule, probably the others were not capable of doing full Mexico to Canada rides, they could do a few 100 miles. And so I kind of like divvied up the work among
your team.
Five adults. I used like 5 different animals, and I divvied it up Mexico to Canada, and I saved Dakota for like the hardest stretches and the parts where I knew I couldn't do it with anyone but him. And so he had a fabulous time because he was not having to go all the way from Mexico to Canada. And I got to feel like I was doing right by him and not kind of taking advantage of his talents. Like, it wasn't going to be a typical, like, the level of achievement that I had before where I was doing Mexico to Canada with like Shila covering every mile. Like,
She was 5 horses in one. She was literally 5 horses in one.
And I just knew that it was not like, it wasn't, Dakota probably could do it, but if I could do it easier for him, like, why take advantage of that? Like, why not try to make it easier on him? And especially because I knew if Dakota, heaven forbid, did get injured out there, now I can't do Mexico to Canada because none of my horses were capable of going through the hardest parts of the trail. Like, he was the only one that could jump the trees, that could do the hard sections that I knew we would encounter. And I was like, I can't risk him getting hurt because I'm trying to ask him to ride every mile. And now, I'm a dead ship in the water. So I was like, I'm going to do this smarter and make sure that he is, not being asked to do work that like another horse can do. And then the parts where I need him, I will have my partner. And so we did that like 4th Mexico to Canada ride that way. And there was definitely like, it didn't feel the same for multiple reasons, like obviously not having Shila and having just such a different dynamic to it. Like, I was so proud of Dakota because like that fire and like everything that I thought that he wouldn't grow into, he did. And he was 15, 14, 14 or 15. I guess 15.
Yep.
He was 15
there you
on
go.
that ride. So
it's at the same age.
So,
when they hit their stride.
Yeah. And he just did fabulous. And I was so happy. And I felt like I had done right by my horses on that. Like, all of them I made decisions based on the horse itself, not on what the
you wanted
ride
to
should
do.
be or what the goals could be. Like, I met the horse where they were and responded appropriately. And so I felt really good about that and had no regrets. But there was also then just like the certain spark or kind of like drug that I used to get from the rides had changed. It was no longer what it used to be. And I couldn't help when I was out there on my last Mexico to Canada ride, because there's parts, like not every mile of a Mexico to Canada ride is like 5-star views. Like, you have a whole bag of views. Like, some are 2 stars. There's a lot of 3 stars. Hopefully like a couple times a week, maybe you get a 4-star view, and then like rarely will you get like 5-star views, maybe like once a week or something. And so I couldn't help when I'd be sometimes in the like meh parts, remembering like there's so many beautiful places out there that I've gotten to see by riding other places. And there's so many places I still haven't gotten to see that I know are beautiful just because a Mexico to Canada ride doesn't cross through it. And I realized like I didn't really want to spend my time anymore
on
riding
that trail
just to prove something, you know, like
right.
I didn't want to ride just to cover a distance or a route anymore. I wanted to ride places that gave
spectacular.
That were spectacular. And like I realized that like now, like the drug had like morphed into the feeling of, you know, obviously partnership with the horses, very rewarding. And also just seeing beautiful places and experiencing those beautiful places. It was now no longer about the like, you know, mileage or the distance or that kind of accomplishment no longer meant what it used to because I had already done it. And in a sense, I had already peaked as high as I was probably ever.
It's also like getting older.
Shila.
It's getting older. Yeah. I've felt that in my body too, that like in your 20s, we're kind of wired for adrenaline. And then our relationship with adrenaline shifts towards end of the... How old are you now?
I'm 32.
Okay. Well, similar age. And
yes, you just had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you. 34, which terrifies my parents, but there we go. Yeah, like relationship with adrenaline shifts and you stop looking for adrenaline and you start looking for home. You start looking for something that feels more like in the body rather than outside the body. I've certainly felt that too. I mean, what's your, out of the trails you've done so far, what might be your favorite? And do you plan on doing Mexico to Canada again? Or
I think I might do Mexico to Canada again, but it would be if I felt like if it was the right horse and partnership and it didn't feel like it was forced. Like it's not going to be for the goal itself. It'll be like if it organically feels right
with that
I would do it again. And I don't know if I'll ever do it a through ride where it's like 1 year. Like I'm perfectly happy to do it in like chunks now because especially when you're pushing it all in 1 year, not only is it like uncomfortable for basically the entire time, and it's stressful and there's just a lot of other unfun things. Like if the whole purpose is to like see the places, seeing them all in like compressed into 6 months isn't necessarily the best way to experience that. You know, like you're then having to go through places maybe in an ideal time of year. If there's wildfires and smoke, you're still trying to like go through and seeing somewhere.
It takes how long to do the ride?
It takes like 5 to 6 months.
To through ride the Mexico to Canada?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You usually try to go as slow as you can.
Right.
And so kind of like the biggest window you can usually get is like 6 months.
You start in spring, finish in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you like really were to hustle it, you could maybe get it done in like under 5 months. But then it just, again, it feels unethical. Like,
yeah, you would need to ride an actual you would need to ride an actual dragon, or you'd need a string of horses that are getting trucked in to do legs, you know, and who's got the logistical power for that?
I did my first one in 4.5 months. So I did my first one really fast. And I
way to go, Shila. I mean, shit, she just
I know we would have actually done it in 4 months, except for would have been 4. I don't know. I have to do the math. Maybe I guess no. We did it in over 4 months. We did it in 4.5 months, and I even had like the very end of it be a little bit slower because I didn't quite finish the trail before grad school started from like delays and things going sideways, and so I had to go back to school, and I still had 150 miles left, and I just left the big chunk in the Sierras in California because I could tell by things not going well early on in my trips and having delays and things. And I was like, I might not finish this in time. And I can't just pop up to Washington from my university in LA, you know, on a weekend to like finish up anything I don't finish. So I was kind of like, okay, we need to leave a couple 100 miles open in California in case I don't finish this thing in time. And then, you know, I can play hooky for a couple days, and there's Labor Day weekend, and I'll escape to the mountains and I'll just knock out this last little bit. And so that's ended up what I had to do was I started grad school in late August, and I had to like finish up the last 150 miles. And I finished like August 31st was when I
Wow.
finished like the whole route, which was like just a little bit shy of 5 months.
How many people do you know have ridden as a through ride with horses?
It's so hard, especially, I mean, even like for my first two, I wasn't on social media, and I had a
You don't
blog.
know. You don't
Yeah,
know.
I feel like there's definitely more than I know of, for sure, because I don't feel like the representation is accurate. So I don't like putting a number on it because I don't know how many
or
are
how
out
many
there.
do you know?
I haven't seen anyone finish since I started.
No one's there. I mean, you don't know anyone else who's doing it like you do. That's amazing.
Yeah, I
I'm
haven't
sure
seen
there are
anyone
people,
finish.
but
Yeah, there's some that came super close. Like there was one guy that I think had to stop his ride within how far would that have been? Like maybe 150 miles. Like under 200 miles was when he had to like stop his ride. So he got so
close.
So close. Yeah.
There was a Netflix
and I would even give it to him if it weren't for the fact that like the part that he didn't quite make is like the hardest part of the whole trail.
Oh,
and
right,
so
I see.
There's probably that like slightly
like he can have that
pretentious part of me that's like, is it really fair if like you didn't have to go through that and the rest of us did? Like, but
I know that there was
like, he's still an amazing rider and an amazing packer, and like definitely more talented in a lot of ways than I am, but
you
I
have
think
to be
I'm
talented.
a slightly better long distance rider.
You have to be talented. I know that there was one Netflix documentary of like a group of dudes.
Yes.
And Unbranded,
so they
who did it?
They did it just before me. So so they were the other ones, and they didn't do a national scenic trail. They were very smart about the route they picked, where like the Continental Divide Trail, which is what they were close to, that one going through Colorado, it takes a while for the snow to melt. And so if you don't hit it right, or if you do it in the wrong year, you might not be able to do it at all. So when they were planning on doing a documentary, they were being very smart. And they knew too, because in 2010, I believe, one of the guys that did Unbranded, he had done like 2,000 miles on the Continental Divide Trail, and he had gone through Colorado. And so he kind of knew, okay, if we're going to do a documentary, like we can't have it being a high snow year completely derail filming it. So they were very smart about kind of how they picked their route, which went through Utah instead of Colorado, so that they could not have quite the problem of like, well, what if it's a really high snow year and we have to completely scrap?
They just avoided that. I just avoided that.
So they picked their route to go through Arizona and Utah. And then they linked back up eventually to the Continental Divide Trail. But they were smart about, in the early part of summer, making sure that they were going through like less snow impacted areas so they could get through. So they were really smart about how they did their route. And it wasn't until I did the Continental Divide Trail that I was like, aha, this explains why they didn't do the Continental Divide Trail again. Yeah.
They did it with you have your mum as a support team, and she leapfrogs with you with the trailer and supplies and stuff. But like they were a group of dudes with a support team and a camera crew out there. I mean, not to minimize what they did, but Gillian, you're a badass. You did it on your own. Like, what the hell, man?
It's definitely interesting. I love kind of seeing how different people, like even how those guys, one of them, and he did it with a couple other buddies on the 2,000 mile ride. So he traveled with 2 friends on the first one and then 3 friends on the Unbranded one. And they traveled with more horses, and they went like 2 weeks between resupplies, which is such a different way than I do it. And the way they did their 2,000 mile ride, I don't think that they met a trailer. So like they definitely have done things differently. And I've just never felt comfortable traveling with that big of a distance between resupplies. And especially, it doesn't matter what kind of animals you have. And like Shila and Dakota were both not easy. They were both hard keepers, and they needed a lot of calories. And the amount of like miles that we were covering, it wasn't like, I didn't want them to worry, especially getting Dakota being like his chronic problem on our first 2 rides being like a slow decline in body weight. I was like obsessive about like, I'm going to make sure that these horses are getting enough food. And so I did my strategy a lot differently in order to basically make sure that mostly what my pack horse was carrying was horse food. and I would have to resupply more often in order to make sure that I always had a lot of
Enough.
feed on hand. So regardless of what the grazing was like, we had enough. And now with Carly, like my mule, she would be perfect for doing like a Mexico to Canada ride where
right.
you don't bring food and they are just grazing because she is a
Lives off air.
super easy keeper.
Yeah.
So like with the right animal, you can do things differently, but I never could have been successful doing like the way Unbranded did their ride, resupplying every 2 weeks, or the way that they did their other ride. I never could have been successful with the horses I had. You know, like you have to, and I try to explain this too when people reach out to me about like planning a big ride, and it's like, you're probably not going to, you can't follow a formula. You can't just like copy paste, like, here's what this person did, here's where they camped, here's where they resupplied, and I'm going to do exactly that and be successful. It's so variable. Like,
it's so variable.
Do you have a support person? Like, how long can your horse go without eating? How much weight can your horse comfortably carry? How much mileage are you or your horse comfortable with covering each day? Like, it's all so variable, and you have to really like design your ride and your strategy to fit you and your horses. And I try to teach that in my workshops.
Right.
Not necessarily that people are going out and doing long distance rides, but even just how they do an overnight ride. Like, you don't have to copy paste it. You don't have to go out there with a pack horse if you don't have a pack horse. You know, if you just have one horse, like, there's ways you might be more limited due to kind of like the circumstances, but there are still things that you can go out and achieve. And especially if you're trying to figure out if it's even something you like to do and want to invest a bunch of time and money into, like maybe, you know, you don't want to have to like, jump into the deep end of the pool like I did and do like, go Mexico to Canada. Like, that's not really the way I recommend doing things. And it's nice to know that there's ways that you can like ease both you and your horse into something without having to overcommit or set you and your horse up for failure, or put in a bunch of like finances if you don't have that ability to like go do stuff. And I try in my workshops primarily, like, there's lots and lots of places that you can learn packing and that you can learn how to go in the backcountry with your horse from like a traditional mindset. And a lot of those mindsets are focused on maintaining tradition, which is beautiful. It's like as an art form to like pack in certain styles and ways. And that's obviously just never how I learned. I learned from YouTube and like experience. And so I think at least then where I fit in is, you know, I respect people teaching the tradition, and I don't, you know, that's like their specialty. I know it's not my specialty. And I think where I help is helping people that don't have the resources to do things exactly in the traditional way, that they like, there are adaptions that they can make, and how to basically, you know, here's like the list of all of the things, and then you cherry pick what would work for you and your horse to then be successful. I try really hard to like, that's what I try to like bring to the community, is a way to make it more adaptable to like the non-conventional rider or person that wants to go outdoors with a horse and like doesn't want to take, you know, some of the heavy gear, or learn, or feels nervous about learning hitches and certain things that they think is a barrier between them and getting out there with their horse. That's really not. And it's a beautiful tradition, and it's worth like learning about and reading about, especially if it calls to you. But it's not a requirement to go out with your horse. Like, it's not something you have to do to go and share time with your horses in the backcountry. It's a choice, and you can either invest into it when and where you're able, or you can like never invest in it, and you can just blaze your own way and style of doing things. Like, it doesn't have to be set into a mold. So I try to like be an advocate for, you know, inclusivity in terms of like different ways of doing things.
Yeah, and like non-traditional or modern packing for.
And you can respect certain things about the tradition, and certain things of it are with the horse's best mind or best like abilities. There's definitely some parts of tradition that should be left in the past. Like, not all tradition is good. Like, there's definitely, you should be, you know, critical of like, and always be willing to look at tradition in terms of, is this serving or harming the horse? And if it's harming the horse, then it should be like left. But if it's not harming the horse and you can do it ethically, then it's like, okay, like, yeah, that's a tradition that's worth maintaining if you're able to. But again, if you're not able to, then that doesn't then mean that you shouldn't be allowed to go into the backcountry and experience things. And that's where I try to like bring in like all these other basically perspectives of like how you can do things, even if you can't do it in a traditional sense.
It's on my bucket list to come and share a day with you on a trail somewhere. It's genuinely on my bucket list. There, I just invited myself.
I know we have to schedule.
We have to. It would be a scheduling thing, but I'd love to. I really, really would. It would be a lot of fun. I mean,
I'll definitely be excited too once my like youngsters are like getting up there. I'm definitely excited to like get your feedback on some of them. I know one I'll probably have to sell. Just like time, I have like 8 horses, and just
nice.
Like I can't meet all their needs.
Definitely,
yeah. And I got 3 youngsters with the mindset of being really scared of, I got quite a few adult horses, and I could really see how like none of them were going to kind of materialize into being what Shila was, and none of them were going to be Mexico to Canada horses. And you don't always know until you like go into it. And again, I had kind of fallen into it. Like I ended up with a Mexico to Canada horse at 13 and didn't know it. And I just like, because I had the horse for it, I was then inspired to do it. It wasn't like I was inspired to do it and then was like, let me go find the horse. It was like backwards. And now I was going the other way where I'm like, I want to do a Mexico to Canada ride.
Need to find the horse.
And that ended up being
really hard because she's 1 in a million. She's a 1 in a million. Shila's a 1 in a million.
And I didn't have like necessarily the budget. I definitely have a bit of a bleeding heart. So I was definitely taking on like lots of projects and lots of horses that I was like, oh, they're a diamond in the rough. Like I will polish them up and we'll go do this big thing. But some things can't quite be polished up. Like what I was saying about my Arabian, like, she just had such a difficult start in life that while she can go in the mountains and I can do hundreds of miles with her, and as long as it's not a lot of difficult obstacles, like she can do really well, but she's still probably never going to be capable of doing a Mexico to Canada ride, and that's okay. And I don't think she would want to do one either.
Right.
Skyla wanted to do it, and that's I think at least too what's helpful is I have that bar of like I know what it feels like to go in the mountains with a horse that wants to be there. Do it.
Yes.
And so I don't force it when I don't feel that with my horses. Like when Dakota suddenly just like blossomed into this horse that's like, yeah, I have the drive to go do it. It was like, like, what a relief to know that I have like a partner again
who
that wants to go
there.
do big things. Yeah. And then Carly ended up finding, probably just getting in shape. She definitely became a lot more like team player, less like, oh my God, we have to go climb a mountain. So and I learned to appreciate too, like just her style. Like Shila was more guns blazing the whole day, and Carly's much more like energy conserving. But I have never seen her tired in camp. Like it doesn't matter how big of a day we have, how much elevation we get. Like she, she's more slow and steady. Like she's not going to go bombing up a mountain. She will plod her way up there. But when we get to camp, like,
she's fresh.
She's fresh. Yeah. She's just like, we can still do another 20 miles as long as that my pace, but we can do it. So I've learned to really appreciate how like tough she is. She just, sets her pace. Like, and that's the pace that you go at is Carly's pace. It's a little slower than we sometimes used to go.
Slow and steady.
Carly can have her fast. She can have her fast days when she's in shape. So it's not too much slower, but it's a little slower than when Shila was the one setting the pace and Dakota was a good sport and just kind of like keeping up and trotting on a regular basis to like keep close. So we go a little slower than we used to, but not too much. I've been happy with like where they're at, and I'm definitely really excited about like my youngsters, but it does suck to have found myself with like 8 horses and be like, oh, I can't quite
handle them all.
Maintain 8, especially once 8 are all at that point where they need like riding and exercise.
It's a lot. I don't know how you do it. I
don't do it very well. It's the opposite of how it used to be.
Well, I've got 2 horses that I train for riding. I've got a third on their way, but he's 2, so it'll be I'm
so
expecting.
excited when he comes.
Yeah, it's going to be 10 years.
He's so cute.
He's adorable, but I'm not really going to be thinking of like big things until he's like 12, but I won't be sitting on him until he's 6. I mean, I'll sit on him at like 4, but it'll be a sit and off again. There won't be like riding until he's 6. But I remember, do you remember that mare I spoke about earlier today that everyone had to like, you had to launch yourself onto her?
Yeah.
Well, when Sunny was in shape, he would keep up with her all day. He's a little pocket rocket. He's just like he's a tank on steroids, and he's not in shape now, bless him. But last time we were up in the mountains, he was in shape, and my boss at the time was riding a Hispano Arabe, so Andalusian Arab cross, very, very fit, lots of miles. And she was saying, "Oh, okay, Lockie's going to come with Sunny," and okay, well, I'll have to hold my horse back so Sunny can keep up. At the first canter, and we were barefoot. Her horse was shod. And at the first canter, we just left her in the dust and off we went, giggling, just straight past. I have it on video too. I have proof of it. Oh, Gil, I'm going to start winding down the podcast. I could really talk to you for hours.
We could talk for hours.
What I want to do is sit you down over a beer and ask questions about saddles and shoeing and logistics. That's what I want to do.
Like, things that we could go into because we both come from like a similar
background
of wanting horses to be comfortable and like less is more.
Yes.
And I think that's sometimes where for certain horses and for sometimes the level that I ask them to do things, I don't always get to do it quite the way I want because I just don't find that their bodies are quite, doing things. And like, I feel like sometimes like I'm still 13 where like I have these dreams of how I want things to do and how and then I just don't quite have the skills to do
if you
everything yet. It's still
let me lay this off on the table. I'll lay this off on the table. I know you're a crazy busy person, but if you ever wanted to knock our heads together as a team on one of your horses, we can do that digitally, where we can sort of look at some of the things and with the goal of your big things you want to do with them. If you ever wanted to knock your head on that, I'm so down to collaborate on that. I'm so down. You just reach out and we can discuss it. We can plan out something or not. It's just a very, very open invitation.
The one that always I definitely want to get better at the horse hoof trimming, especially just even so that when I'm home, I can like take care of it on my own. Sometimes
it's life changing to be able to pick up a rasp and fix the feet like that afternoon. It needs to be in your pocket. I think all horse people need to have at least a basic trim in their back pocket. I mean, I'll get fired for saying that, but like I remember on a Facebook group years ago, some cow farmer found his way into a farriers group, into a barefoot group, and he said, he just called us all out. He found his way in there and he said, "You horse people, I just don't get you. You are the only owners of large animals that don't know how to do nothing with your horse's feet, and you completely outsource that." He's like, pig farmers, cow farmers, goat farmers, sheep farmers, they can pick up a nipper and a rasp and do something to keep the feet. If they have to call an expert, fine. I mean, we drive past dairy farms in our region and we see the cows all tipped on their sides and getting their feet done and everything. Oh my goodness. Yes, I'm happy to help you with that. If you got a
the one area where I feel like the world is still lacking is in the hoof boot like materials. I just haven't, no matter how many I've tested, they don't do well. And like that's where I feel like the missing link is
the kind of miles that you're doing. The kind of miles you're doing, there is a lack, because for low mileage work, there's lots of options.
At home, I use hoof boots all the time. Right. Like take the shoes off and I do, for the horses that need it, like Carly and like the Morgans, they haven't needed hoof boots for anything. I'm sure again, if we were like, I'm not doing obviously anything big with like my Morgans because they're quite young. Oh my God, I've been really shocked because I was, like I'm going to go into this real light with them, and like they're more in shape than any of my adult horses, like any of them.
Morgans and no joke.
One, like they're like Shila incarnated in terms of just like they came pre-programmed with
athletics.
Like athleticism, and they've lived on like 20 acres, 25 acres, just like roofs since they were, months old. And it's definitely interesting, just like their baseline level of fitness and like and the breed too, like they have stupid amount of like muscle development. Like I've never seen a young horse that has like the top line development that the three of them have. And one of my mares, like she's her natural core engagement, like it's better than any of my adult horses, like even the ones that are rideable. I'm just like, what is wrong with you, freaks of nature?
Yep. They're no
and
joke.
Like I'm definitely, been very impressed with them. And just they've got short backs, like they've got straight legs, they've got strong feet, and it's been like nice to be able to start something kind of from the ground up and just see like what kind of creature I can like create by doing things a little differently. But I've been surprised at like just how physically strong they are. Like Dakota, when he was their age, was not strong. Not and like I started him at 2.5, and I never would have started him at 2.5 with what I know now.
Right.
But again, it's what I was told to do. And I noticed between 2.5 and like 3.5 for Dakota, there was a big change in his like body composition and his structure. But still, even his fitness did not get to the point where he could like canter up a hill without me having to just like encourage until he was like 6. And like there was just like this big difference, and it took years to like build him up physically. Even though I was riding him, it took years to build him up physically. And I'm happy that, he doesn't come from like any kind of poor genetics, even though I was a child when I picked out his baby daddy and was like, I like that one, it's pretty. Wasn't picking it from a informed mindset. But I mean, he's now 17 and doesn't have any arthritis, any back issues. Like, and he's had a lot of definitely like short-term damage from like pack saddles and incorrect saddle fit. Like he's had hard things happen when he was younger, and like at one point my pack saddle got like broken, and I didn't know it until my first ride, and it was only suddenly when I'm seeing inflammation that I'm like, what's happening? And then like start to realize, oh my God, something broke on my gear. And so like stuff like that, he's definitely, his body's been put through the ringer, but he's 17.
No long-term damage.
Still, he still is like completely pain-free. And I'm like, that's wonderful that like, despite him not being set up for success in a lot of ways, like his body was stronger than, I sometimes would have anticipated. But it's nice to be able to finally do things a little differently with the youngsters. Even though I'm riding them earlier than I thought I would, because I was prepared to be like, if they're like Dakota, and I ride them sometimes only like once or twice a month because I have 8 horses and they're kind of like on the back burner, but they like blow me away with just like every time I ride one, I'm just like, this is ridiculous how in shape you are.
Easy and in shape.
And I'm constantly trying to like bring them down in terms of like, we don't need to work this hard. Like we can do things easier. And they're just like little machines.
They're bred for it. Yeah, it's certainly the case. I know people, once they're into Morgans, they're into them. The Morgan Horse Breeding Association is doing something right, because they seem to be able to produce really, really quality animals over and over and over again.
It helps that like the performance industry hasn't like leaked super.
Hasn't picked them up and started. They haven't started putting them into competition. That tends to help.
Yes.
I have these 3 little questions that I like to ask people to round out.
Did so great with your other question. I don't know if I ever answered it.
But you did. You have told us who you are. But you have. You've told us who you are, what you do, and how you do it. That is an entire podcast. It's amazing. I think you're an absolute rock star. I really do. Like, well, maybe
talking to you has been like the highlight of like my weekend.
Maybe Shila's the rock star and you're her sidekick. Let's say that, because
I feel like she was the naturally talented one, and I just like literally through everything followed her lead. In terms of like learning horsemanship, followed her lead in terms of like all of my adventures. Yeah, she was definitely like the driving force for everyone.
She still is. She still is, because you have her son. So I'm curious to see what your answers will be to these questions. First one is, I'd like to muck out with you something in the equestrian industry that makes you say, what the muck? What is something you think we can just scoop out and shovel out and get rid of?
Oh.
Just pick one thing. There's so many things, but try one thing.
I think sometimes what maybe like gets me the most is people getting a bit of like blinders on in terms of like they're starting down a path. They're convinced it's the right path, whether it's because they're following in tradition's footsteps or they're going super new age, whatever it is. They get so dead set on following down this path that even when they're getting feedback from their horse or that like something's not working, there's some sort of disconnect, or even just like seeing other people that are doing things differently but being successful and being ethical, like even if you're not doing it and you're doing just fine and your horse isn't giving you any kind of like negative feedback, if you're seeing other people that are doing things differently but ethically and successfully, that then maybe that means that there's more than one path to do stuff. And I wish equestrians would sometimes just take those blinders off and just like do away with there being like one right way to do stuff or only one standard of being ethical or only, like there's so much gray. There's so much gray area.
Right on.
And I like following accounts that I don't entirely agree with, but who are empathetic people and who don't preach, if you don't do what I do, you're wrong. I like it when people explain why they do, like the why behind what they do things. And then I can understand the thought process and be like, is that applicable to me and my horse? Like there's times where I've definitely learned things from someone and like taken it and applied it to me and my horse because I understood the why. And then there's been times where it's like, I think given like my circumstances, like this wouldn't be a good fit for us, or I try it and it ends up not being a good fit, whatever it is. And I think that's okay. But I don't know, I love following people that do things differently than me, but who communicate it from a place of like non-judgment and non-preachiness. And they're just simply showing and explaining what they do and letting, sharing openly, with people. I really value those members of the equestrian community, and I wish we had more of them so we can do the buck out with like the people who are just like, set in their lanes.
Yes. I live in constant fear that I become preachy because I definitely have that. I definitely have that energy inside me, and it's actually I get it wrong sometimes. Sometimes I get a bit preachy. Sometimes I get a bit fierce on a subject. I'm getting better about who I'm being fierce with when I'm being fierce about it, and making sure
anyone that follows you would know, even if for some reason, maybe how it comes across in a post for that moment, it's a snapshot. And like, I don't know, anyone who follows you, I think would know that you are not a preachy person. Like you're very open-hearted. The way that you interact with a variety of people. You have compassion for like different walks of life, as long as, you feel that their heart's in a good place and they're trying to put the horse first and not exploit them. Like that's
definitely.
I think that it's okay to have like lines and be like, yeah, that's like a no-go line for me.
Yes,
like,
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Respect other people, but like no space for that. Like there's definitely okay to have
a line to draw. That's what I get concerned about myself. I get concerned that I can be preachy about the lines that I've drawn, that I'm like, that's a no-go to me. Like I had my friend Felicity Davies on the podcast, and she was sharing about practices that she's witnessed where people were lunging a single horse for 7 hours. And for me, I have no problem to sit on a pedestal and pontificate and preach about how absolutely bullshit that is. There is no reality on God's green earth where anyone could look me square in the eyes and explain that to me as something valuable. for the animal. It's very different what you're doing, but even what you're doing, there comes a limit to your day, and there's resting built, you prepare them for that and you build them up to it. But lunging a horse for 7 hours before a competition, I don't get that. And I can get preachy about that. I can get preachy about that.
And I try too, because I'm always worried that people have this perception of me that like the way I do things is exploitative. Like I'm always worried that like people are going to not see how much of my heart is in it. And I try to like basically in every social media post, like I try to show that like this is not just like a means to an end. Like they do matter to me.
It's an expression of your relationship with your horses, and you have you have proven over and over again, not just with one, not just with two, but with multiple animals over many miles in challenging conditions, that your rides are, in my opinion, an expression of relationship with your horses. And if more people I know have experienced one afternoon in your saddle and felt your horses after your work with them, that it would change them irrevocably forever. So yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to muck out the preachiness. I will muck that out with self-awareness that I have that potential too. And it is an element. Yeah,
we all do, because we all do have our boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to like, just to make it clear that you have boundaries and you're not just like a complete wet noodle that's like, I have love and compassion for everyone, including the people that I think are like doing damage to their horses. Like,
and that's why we're friends.
To have those lines, and sometimes exactly. And I think sometimes as we learn and we grow, maybe sometimes we realize maybe my line was a little too like
hard
early on, and like maybe there's a little more wiggle room than I thought, but there still is a line to that.
There's still a line
can't be crossed.
Yeah. I'll never forget this. It's a recent story, but someone once came. I was sitting in my house in this office working, minding my own business. The house was quiet, the gates were locked, and a guy had driven past my farm, saw that I had horses, and had parked himself in my driveway and was honking his horn at my house until someone came out of the house so that he could ask if I rode my horses, how far I rode them, if I competed them, and if I bred them, and do I have problems with abscesses? That's what he wanted to know. And I thought, wow, that's a boundary for me. I will certainly pontificate that, like, if someone's house is quiet, don't bug them unless you're coming with as a courier, and even then sometimes I can't because I'm in the middle of something, and anyway, everyone's got their thing.
Should be a boundary.
Should be a boundary.
It is interesting sometimes how entitled people feel.
Well, it's the Spanish Inquisition. It's the Spanish Inquisition.
Yeah.
Like, it's the Spanish Inquisition. It's a thing. It's part of their culture that they're inquisitive by nature, and that can be invasive sometimes. I love them. I've got the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful neighbors here. We're so lucky. But yeah, I will muck out preachiness, and I'll muck out people who present information from an absolutely rigid point of view on subjects which are not designed to be rigid in their point of view.
Especially if they don't come from a place of like, here's why I do it, here's why it works for me, so that you can understand the parameters. Because usually something only works within
a
certain parameters.
Right.
And if you're not being cognizant, that's how I teach in my class. And like, this system works, but there are these cons. And if you're trying to go outside of these certain parameters, like the success of the system will no longer be successful.
Oh, and you and I both know as teachers, because you're teaching too, that is actually harder to teach than just giving people an obedience cue.
Yeah, and that's what people want. People want
you to dumb it down. They want you to dumb it down for them, and we can't. We can't.
They want a prescription of like, here, I do XYZ steps and I go in the backcountry and I'm successful. And I feel like I spend so much of my time being like, here's all these different tools and here's when and where you would use them. And I'm like constantly trying to explain the bigger picture of like why something works and why something doesn't.
Yes.
And I feel like that's where, at least my history of riding long distance trail and pushing horses physically to kind of their limits and riding in so many different terrains and environments, it gives me the perspective of like, I know where the parameters are, so I can try to help you
find the
work within the parameters without having to quite do the like learning curve that I did where you're bumping into the perimeters and you're like, oh, this is now failing once I've gotten to this point. So I try to help people have a more positive, less emotional roller coaster learning experience that I
Yeah.
had by like giving them the bigger picture to start with rather than kind of being, deep in the forest and not being able to see what's
Yes.
actually around them.
Yes. And sometimes there are some people who are adventurous and they need to go out there and feel it for themselves. I mean, I tell a story about Sani almost falling off a cliff. And he told me that the trail was unstable, but I had checked the trail. I thought the trail was fine. I had ridden the trail before. I had groomed the trail. I had weed whacked the trail. I had triple checked the trail. And then when I rode the trail, and he said no at one part of the trail, and the trail washed out and he almost went off a cliff. Almost. He didn't. I tell people that story and they all clutch their pearls, but I say, I made this mistake so that I can sit here and say, when a horse says no to you 3 times, you say 2, which tells me the kind of trails you've been on. You say 2. I've seen some of your videos. I know the drop-offs that you ride. I would say, yeah, on the kind of trails Gil rides, we would say 2. But in most people, in most scenarios, we can give it 3 goes. And when a horse says no 3 times, and so it's not just like an abstract thing that I'm saying, but I can say I've road tested this so that you don't have to.
And I think that works really well for personalities like ours that aren't afraid to do new things. And like,
right.
But there's the people I think that we're helping the most are the ones who let fear too often keep them from doing things, and their fear of making mistakes, and their fear that the mistake they make is going to be irreversible, when most mistakes are very recoverable.
Yes.
And I think that those are the people who often look for mentorship and coaching and to be educated before they do something, because essentially what's blocking them is their fear of making a mistake and doing the wrong thing and jeopardizing their relationship with their horse, and not always realizing that very few mistakes are like truly irreparable. Most mistakes are like pretty low level in terms of like consequences. You can grow from them, but their own fear stops them. And that's where them having people like us that are like, hey, I did this, I failed at it, here's how you can avoid it, and here's how you can kind of have the parameters, and it just helps lower their fear threshold that's keeping them from trying. And it helps just get them to try, because their fear has a little bit more logic to work with rather than just pure emotion of fear.
Mm-hmm. And you've just explained to me that you're going to be a very successful coach as well as long distance rider. If you continue to coach on these subjects and what you do,
there's not a big market for it, but yeah, where there is,
the market's going to grow.
The market's a little small.
No, it'll continue to grow, and it should continue to grow. I want to see more people out in nature enjoying their horses. And so, like, you've just explained that you're going to do really, really well at that. Okay, let's shift into second question. Second question is tide of change. So there's a tide of change that's occurring in all sectors, but in the equestrian sector, it looks like a trend towards kinder treatment of the animals, better practices. How do you see the tide of change? And if you think you're contributing to it, how might you be contributing to it?
I think the tide, okay, go back to the first part of the question. What about, I got the part where how do I contribute to it, but now I've lost the first half.
Okay, let me help you. So firstly, do you think you contribute? Yeah, there is a tide of change that is occurring. Do you think,
is it going too far? Is that what you were?
No, there's a tide of change occurring, which I think is really important, like a trend towards better horse training that's less abusive towards horses. Yes. Do you feel like you're contributing to that tide of change?
I do. I'm like definitely an empathetic horse owner at my heart. Like I said, the first decade of my solo horse ownership was entirely guilt driven, and feeling like I didn't have the resources to give them the life I wanted to give them, and constantly trying to do better and grow in that category. And I think because of at least how I try to communicate about my thought process in terms of how I try to have a partnership with the horses in the mountains, that you can do things unconventionally that might look a little silly. I'm sure that there's a lot of packers that would see the amount of horse food that I carry with me on my pack horse and think that I am delusional and that it's unnecessary or it's silly or it's not my horses should be tougher or whatever and be able to do it. And I know my horses. I know which ones, like Carly, are tough enough, and I know which ones need my extra help, and that if I help them, they can go farther, and I'd rather, if it's possible, like do whatever I can to make it as enjoyable of an experience for them. And I think that is sometimes, even if more traditionalists and other packers do practice that, they don't always communicate it quite so warm and fuzzy. They definitely have sometimes like this tougher exterior, and even if their heart is mushy inside, that's not what they're sometimes projecting to people, and it kind of like isolates, and then there kind of ends up being this divide between some of like the outdoor packer traditionalist community and the modern equestrian, where the modern equestrian thinks that these outfitters and these packers are brutal, unethical and brutal and using their animals, when you really, if you like approach it a little less confrontationally and you approach it like more on their terms, they act, a lot of them are actually like good, mushy, love their horses.
Soft. The softest horse people I've ever met are backcountry roughnecks, cowboys. In that, like, they put up a front, and but when it comes down to their horses, they are ooey gooey, and frankly, some of the most brutal, heart of steel, coal-eyed horse owners I've ever met are the modern day equestrian. I mean, there's nothing going on there. There's no ka-thunk happening there at all. It's just,
and I think that's at least where I feel fortunate that I can see the mushiness in a lot of the packers and the outdoorsmen. And I have a lot of compassion for obviously that whole demographic. And I see why some of them have like their walls up about like the modern movement, because they're just kind of constantly getting attacked, and they feel like a lot of it's not being accurately projected. Some of them deserve it. But a lot don't. And at least even if they deserve a little, they don't deserve the amount. They don't deserve all of it that they're getting, and it's coming not from a compassionate place. And so, of course, it's not going to be getting through, even if what you are trying to convince them of has some truth and like would be nice if they applied, because they're being attacked for so many other things that isn't warranted. Then they can't hear maybe those other things that they could progress on. And just, it becomes so messy.
It does get really messy. It does get really messy.
Like that's where I try to like fit in. Like I try to.
Yes, you do. Oh my word.
I'm an over communicator. And so I try to like show that people that go in the backcountry and that do things with their horses can like present themselves in a way that like more modern equestrians can digest. And it's like, okay, like you can go in the backcountry and be ethical. And then they might still have their walls up of like, okay, she's in this camp and then everyone else is in this camp. But hopefully once you kind of get a foot in the door, it like opens up the door to then realizing like, oh, I guess these other people are also ethical once you kind of like peel back the layers. But it just helps be a bit of a bridge, is kind of what I hope I get to be between sometimes the two camps of people. Love it. Lets people see, and maybe too, even the people who are like the hardcore packers, and they think anyone that doesn't do the traditionalist stuff are not worth listening to. But then they see me coming through in my hiking shoes and my like yoga pants and a backpack, and they're like, oh, what is this granola crunchy person doing? And then they're like, oh, you did Mexico to Canada a few times. Okay. I guess,
on your own.
So then my merits kind of show that like the granola crunchy, like modern ideas aren't, doesn't mean that you don't go out and do things. So I think I get to be this interesting like bridge between the two communities of like, I hear them both out. I understand their perspectives. And just by doing myself and not trying to be anyone else, I get to kind of be this little like segue in between the two of them that just lets there be a little less divide between the two camps.
I totally get it. And now you've answered the question beautifully, how you're contributing towards the current tide of change. You've demonstrated awareness of the tide of change. it's a really important distinction, and I probably won't get many voices on my podcast who will speak to that in the way that you have. To be the bridge between these two camps is so important. If any way I can help you, put my shoulder behind you to help that happen, to bridge that gap, you let me know. In many ways, I feel like I do the same thing. Like
I think you do the same thing, and mostly just because of what an open person you are. Like if someone doesn't take the time to see who you are, like that's their own fault. You can't force people to do that. But I think anyone that like scratches the surface can see like, oh, he might, from at least a traditionalist point of view, he might seem like he's really like committed to this lane, but the way you communicate it and the whys and how kind and compassionate you are to other people, and the way you explain how we all start from different places, and like the horse learning, like we only know what we know, from like circumstances in our environment, and a lot of us go through an awakening at some point, and to like be compassionate for people like where they are, and to try to like help bring more, just to help the horse. It's about helping the horses, not necessarily about demonizing certain people and saying like, you don't get to be part of our community because you do XYZ. It's more like, how can we just set that part aside for like a common goal of
yes.
like horses?
Yes, I do lose my patience sometimes. There are days when I'm not compassionate because I'm introverted, and when I have this tidal wave of humanity thrown at me inappropriately by people who are not entitled to do that with me, I feel I have a potentially volatile reaction to that sometimes. And I'm an imperfect person. I'm aware of my foibles and my imperfections, and not everyone would categorize me as compassionate. Certainly some people would categorize me as too strong. Some people would say that my boundaries are too high. Some people would say that I'm not accommodating enough. That is true. I mean, I do my best, but I try. And I'm not a perfect person. So I'm reticent to form a brand, quote unquote brand, or reputation around compassion, because it's not something I'm always able to keep up. Because sometimes in this life, it's been my point of view, just like you have to dig your heels into a climb, and you got to get up that hill, you got to commit to the trail and not give up on yourself. Sometimes my version of not quitting the trail, Gil, is standing my ground and doing that with some strength, and being really, really honest and saying, stop it, back up. No, you don't. Not to me, you don't. Because if I allowed what was ever going to happen next to happen to me, I'm no longer being kind to myself. And if I'm not kind to myself, I can never be kind to another person again. So sometimes to defend kindness, it requires a certain level of strength, and sometimes even defensiveness, so that I can defend that kindness, because I'm not someone for everyone. I can't be everything for everyone. And my programs, my teachings is not for everyone. I'll be as much as I can. I've shown up in all sorts of places. But
I've had quite a few people that have reached out for advice, and they come into it with such a sense of like a little bit of entitlement about
I know what you speak.
And I joke sometimes that I feel like the crusher of dreams, because they'll come into it and they basically are sending me this big email, basically wanting me to validate. I'll be like, yep, you are 100% on the right track. You will have no obstacles. Like, do exactly that, and you'll get to Canada fine. And when I send like a long email back being like, these are some things you're going to have to think about. Like, these are some things that maybe just because you haven't done a Mexico to Canada ride, you aren't aware are a big problem, that like, you should, I can try to give you a heads up on. And a lot of people do not like
that,
being told that their expectations are maybe not aligned with what the reality will be.
Right.
And I try as nicely as I can to say it, but like, definitely, like, there's no quicker way to get under my skin than basically to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, or that, I give this long email back and to like not get like a thank you or something for your time, for answering my question. It's like stuff like that. Definitely like, oh.
It's hard. We need a support group for equestrian professionals who are in that category, or even social media folks who are in that category, because it does become a thing. Once I've noticed a definite shift in my life when everything went above 10K on all platforms, and I'm so grateful for the position that I've got, the place at the table that I've got, the business that I've got. I love it. I wake up every day, I'm living my dream. And one of the every dream has little nightmares in it, little ones. And
Of course, just because there's a dream doesn't mean it's no longer hard.
yeah, and one of the little nightmares is this: what you're talking about is inappropriate activity, often done under the cloak of darkness on emails and private messages. And I've just hired a full-time administrator to help me distance myself from that, because it was damaging my mental health and my sanity to be dealing with that all the time. And so that I can
sometimes it's my mom for me. Like my mom is
thanks,
my
mom. Your
momager.
mom. What is your mom's name?
Jody.
Jody. Jesus Christ, Jody. Maybe Jody's the rock star. Shila's the
Oh my gosh.
she's
I know
she's the
my mom
sidekick,
is
and
for
you're just the
sure
tadpole along for
incredible.
the ride.
Yeah.
Wow.
I like feel like I've trained her to, in the sense, be a secretary, and there's certain like emails that will come in and she has like full access to my email account. And there'll just be some that are just like that cliche, like you can just tell by the way the email is,
Yeah.
like where they are. Like I've gotten really good. And like it was funny too, because initially I'd get emails like this
And
that I just
you'd feed
knew
it.
were
Yeah.
a waste of time. And I got to the point where I just couldn't answer every email. And I was
Yeah.
just like, I would be able to tell based on how they started, or within by the second email, like whether this was going to be worth my time and whether they were just looking to basically pick a fight. And so I would be like, okay. So I basically would start ignoring the ones that were like
Going in that
obviously
direction.
in my like showed red flag. And I was like, I don't have the time or energy to for free do this. I'm going to focus on the people who like seem like they're actually going forth with this or really want to get feedback. And like I will dedicate. And so my mom then like kind of took it upon herself. She's like, well, I'll answer these other people.
Oh
like
no,
you don't know if
Mom,
they have good
Jody.
intentions or not.
And then she got dragged into it with them.
I know. And then she's gotten soured on it because she's like, they
Ugh.
never responded. And I was like, nope, they didn't, Mom.
They don't. Yeah.
And so we've all gotten a little bit better, but my mom is like, we kind of tag team it. So the ones that like, we try to like now at least get back to everyone that emails in some capacity. And so my mom kind of like takes the ones that, you know, are like pretty like standard scripted, more responses. Like it's hard to have like I can't just have a pre-formatted email because there's always unique
something
things
different
that I feel like I have to touch on. So my mom takes a lot of like those ones, and then I'll take the ones that are really unique or like definitely seem authentic, and you know, like we need to cultivate like a relationship so that way I can continue to like help them. Those are the ones like I'll take on. But yeah, she's kind of my administrator where she's like, I'll take the ones that basically just suck your time and give nothing back, and you can like focus on these other ones. So yeah, she's a saint. It's been nice having her retired because now she has like she never did
helping
stuff
you.
like she never did stuff like that before. But yeah, she's become more and more helpful with helping me just manage and grow things because she's got some time now, and it's
so excited for you. I'm so excited for you. This is a really exciting turning point, I think, moving into teaching
I can get some things done. I'm like in the middle of like hell or high water right now, it feels like, in terms of a few things with my business and trying to get some things done to see if I can like get it launched in time for other things. Like it's like a domino effect. And I'm like, things haven't been going well in terms of like the other people who are playing a part in it, like, you know, getting things done. And I'm just like, oh, it's been so stressful. And we're getting down to the wire where like maybe it'll all come together. Like maybe it'll have to be pushed another year, but I'm like really hopeful it's all going to come together. That's been stressful, but I'm like, hopefully I'm like on the edge of like another like leap forward that I'm excited about, because I got to do the workshops and I've gotten to really dial in kind of like the curriculum and understanding where I'm seeing people are needing the most help. Because it takes a while to like learn the people you're coaching and like what are they coming to you for, and like who do you need to be to like best serve them, you know. So all of that takes growing, and like feel like some people want to just die, ironically, like me, who went from Mexico to Canada by diving into the deep end. I'm really actually very careful about doing that in terms of if I'm
Yes.
asking people for money
Yes.
or if I'm like trying to present myself as knowledgeable. I have a hard time doing that until I've like
Prepared.
accumulated a lot under my belts. Like only when I've done a lot do I then be like, okay, I really finally feel like we can take this next step. I'm taking probably too long, but that's how my brain works. And I'm sure it's like the introvert in both of us, where it's just like, I don't want to disappoint anyone by not being like as good of a teacher as I could be or as prepared as I could be.
Correct.
And that's
but once you get some miles under your belt as a coach and a teacher, there's the next level from this. I'm letting you know what the next trailhead's going to be on this. So yes, you start out being prepared.
Because how you do your business like inspires me the most out of like anyone. So I literally look to you and I'm just like, I want to be like Lockie in my business.
I want you to be like Gil with what you're doing. I'm so excited about what you're doing because if you have a course or something, I'll be the first to buy it. But you start out preparing and having a curriculum, and then you road test the curriculum, and then you dial it in and you tweak it and you develop, and you make sure you've got what you've got, and then you start rolling it out there. And once you get some miles under the belt as a teacher and a coach, there comes a part where you step back from being a people pleaser. There comes a point where you're like, you know what? I've road tested this enough. I've got enough miles under my belt, and I know that it is not possible to please everybody. My job is less about being outside of myself, and it's more about being in who I am and delivering the best that I can deliver, and then leaving it to you. It's like, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. You can bring Dakota to the tree trunk, but he's got to make the jump, right? You can do all the stuff you can, but he's got to make the jump. And then you get to that point with your coach, with your clients, where it's no longer like, let me shake the pom-poms and cheer you on so that can happen for you. You know,
you definitely describe you really well right now.
Yeah, you do that. But there comes a point where that's not possible anymore. And it can also lead you into really uncomfortable scenarios with people if you're not careful. And so, so that you're protecting your clients in real time and protecting yourself and protecting what you're teaching, frankly, protecting the integrity of what you do, there comes a point where you join People Pleasers Anonymous. When you get to that point, circle back to me. I'll give you the next step.
Okay, I'm probably getting close to there because what you're describing too, like the next phase of my business is I'm trying to find another way to basically lower the threshold that's keeping people that I'm seeing from like going from my workshops to going in the backcountry. Like there's still this barrier that's like keeping them from not making that leap. And I'm trying one more thing that's like making it more achievable for those people. But I know I can't keep. There's only so far you can lower the jump, you know. And I feel like this next step, it took a lot of like other business stuff and a lot of other research. I couldn't have lowered the jump until now anyways, but I'm finally trying to lower the jump again. And I'm just hopefully this is as accessible as I can possibly make it. And after that, it really is going to be on them to do it.
It takes a very special personality to be a solo through rider like yourself. It is also about community. For most people, they would never do it alone, but they would do it with a buddy. They would buddy up. They'd do a trio. They'd do a short-legged ride. They'd trial out the wilderness. They'd go with a friend, because most people don't have that fearlessness, that courageous, grab life by the balls attitude to just head out with their horses on their own, because they're like, you know what, getting eaten by a grizzly bear while my horse has dinner at the campsite is not a great way to die. And for some people, they're like, you know, I love trail riding, but I don't love the idea about having a lonely death on a mountain pass somewhere, you know, by myself. You know, so a lot of people, that's what it might come down to, but they do it with a friend, you know, that feels safer. So it's been my experience that out of 10 people that you teach, maybe one, maybe less, out of 20 people, even 50 people that you teach, maybe one person will fully commit the way you and I would fully commit to something. But there might be 20 or 30 people who will commit very satisfactorily to a certain degree if they do it in a community space. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 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 And that's, again, part of what I'm trying to help foster is like a different sort of like more, yeah, like you said, shared experience, because that has been the
so
threshold
hard.
is people coming to the workshops, meeting a community of people at the workshops, but then, just logistically not always being able to then have someone to go with them in the backcountry. And that's, again, what I'm trying to like help facilitate is a way for it to not be alone.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's like where I'm seeing the big like divide happening is people just still feeling like I don't want to do this alone and being like, okay, well, I'm going to work hard to like solve that like gap. And again, I can only do so much, but like that was like one where it's like, I need to get some other resources together before I can do that. But that's what I've been working towards is like finding a way to meet that need.
Love
and just, again, like lower the jump as low as I can get it for people. So that way it's not so daunting.
Beautiful. I've got one last question for you, and then we're going to finish. I'm having too much fun with you. I know. Too much
I don't
fun.
even know how much time we've been talking. Probably a lot, but
this is going to be
a rainy day outside. So I'm like,
you're going to be 2 episodes. You're going to be 2 episodes, and I'm probably going to have you back because I want to talk with you more about this stuff. But
yay!
Yeah,
bite me. I'm excited.
Love it. So we're in an age of learning journeys. Everyone has a journey, and journeys are good. You know more than anyone else how good journeys can be. But you were able to journey because you were at home with Shila and Dakota. So it didn't matter where you went, you felt at home with your mare. And it was from that feeling of home with her, it gave you wings to fly. If you didn't have what you had with Shila in particular, you would never have gone on such a journey. And I think we've missed that point when we're talking about learning journeys around our horses. We've missed that journeys have to go somewhere, and you have to be at home in the journey, and you can go anywhere, but there needs to be something through you that is true always, that you are at home in, that no teacher, no obstacle can shift that inside you. So, Gil, what is home for you?
Oh man. I've definitely for sure starting out, like my horse was my home. And I think the horse partnership is still my home. Like I don't like the idea of traveling even to go out of the country on like an equator thing. That would be rewarding to me because what I love is taking the horse that I've built so much with.
Yes.
Yeah, it has to be my horses. Like I've gotten offers to go and do like an influencer-y type of excursion to another country with other horses. And for sure, if I didn't have my own horses and the skill set to do it on my own, I would absolutely do it. But after you've done that with your horse, with like that partnership, with the years and years of a relationship behind it, it feels so different. And that would kind of leave me wanting. Even if I was going to another beautiful place on horseback, I would still be left wanting. And I know myself well enough that I would still be thinking, I wish I was seeing this with Dakota. I wish I was seeing this with Carly. Like that would be in the back of my head. And I think that that's where I've realized, like, that's where I feel home is just, even if it's not Shila, I've learned, and it takes years, but I've learned to feel home with basically all of my horses as long as I have them in the right environment that I know that they are like, thriving, like they are, it's at their level of experience or capabilities, and we're not overshooting it, and we're getting a beautiful place, and we're basically kind of like really diving into the depths of what that partnership means. It might be a different level of depth than with a different horse, but for that relationship, like we are in the deep end of that relationship. And for me, that's in the backcountry, the horses. And so that's, I think, where I feel home is even having to rebuild from scratch with a new herd of horses after losing Shila, and especially with Dakota being injured and having to come back from that injury over the course of like 2 years. It was really, I never want to go back to having to start from like the center of the earth. Like that's, I think, why I turned into a horse hoarder, because now I have a bit of resiliency with, not having to necessarily start from scratch again. I don't know if my heart could do that again. It was really hard, but I feel like happy having like a safety net of having so many different horse personalities, so many different relationships, and knowing that like, my like world won't crumble. Like I got enough sense of self in what makes me feel happy, which is, even if it's hard in the beginning, like building on that relationship and getting into the backcountry, even if it's not a Mexico to Canada ride. It doesn't have to be. It could just be a couple nights. And like that level of reward is just as high as going Mexico to Canada on the right horse. It doesn't have to be the distance. It's just going in with the relationship and meeting it where it's at and spending time in the mountains together. Like that for sure feels like home.
Yeah. I love it. Good to know. Good to know that I don't have to go Mexico to Canada or that kind of distance to find that kind of satisfaction with my horses.
Yeah, I feel like I had to go to Mexico to Canada to
discover that.
Like, I can just do 2
nights. Yeah.
Yeah. And like as people constantly ask, like, when's your next Mexico to Canada ride? And I'm constantly like in my messages, like, I don't have any plans to. Like I'm exploring. Like I'm still gonna do big rides by most standards, and still like I enjoy route planning, and I enjoy going through country I've never seen before, and especially in beautiful remote country. Like there's still lots of things on my plans, but it doesn't have to be a set route from Mexico to Canada. Like I'm no longer being constrained by like that, parameters. Like there's so much more to life than just that, and like reward to that. Like it's not the Mexico to Canada part that's the rewarding part. It's the other stuff.
The relationship with happy to hear that. Yeah. Gil, thank you so much for joining me here today and giving time on this rainy day in California to join me on this podcast. I will include your details in the show notes below. I'm looking forward to having you back on the podcast because I'd love to discuss more about route planning and tack choices and
all the nitty-gritty stuff.
Yeah, yes. And like questions about creating fitness in horses, etc. I'd speak to you. Like there's no one else I could speak to.
Again, I felt like I was lucky with Shila, but
she taught you how.
More normal horses like
you learned how.
That actually did need a fitness program.
Yeah.
They weren't just like innate about it.
Yeah, so I'm certainly going to have you back because this first season of the podcast, it's just sort of rolling out all my friends. And then as we go forwards, I'm going to circle back with my friends. We're going to get down onto singular subjects and it's going to continue to deepen. But thank you.
It's nice to have that because so many podcasts do, like you get like a taste of someone or who they are, and
then they disappear.
You get like a bit of you like them, and then but you just don't quite get to dive down. And it's nice. I think that'll be the nice thing about your podcast is people will get to hear people they know they want to hear more from.
Yes,
and then they'll actually get it instead of just being like a little little teaser, being like, oh, okay, well, on to the new person. And I think it helps build investment too in the community and in your podcast because people will want to hear again from people.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to go and walk my dogs now. Thanks for being here.
Yes, I'm sure it's late for you. So yes.
I'm a night bird. I'm a night owl.
Me too.
Yay! Oh my God. Take care, all right?
All right, you too, Lockie. Thank you so much.
Bye. You've been listening to the Emotional Horsemanship podcast. That was my incredible guest, Gillian Larson, and I am your host, Lockie Phillips. If you want to discover more about Gillian Larson, you can go to gillianlarson.net or click the link in the show notes below. If you'd like to learn more about emotional horsemanship, please go to emotionalhorsemanship.com. Thank you for being here. Please remember to leave a review and to subscribe to this podcast. I hope to see you again next time.